Chapter 46. After receiving the Yellow Turban Emperor, Hongjun worked hard day and night. By the time he reached 49, he had completely refined it and branded himself in the deepest part of the core of the Yellow Turban Emperor. He was completely integrated with the core, and there was no distinction between them. At this point, the Yellow Turban Emperor had completely become his celestial device. Even Luo Fan could not take it away. After refining, all the power of the Yellow Turban Hercules Emperor could be used by Hongjun. He could change it into a tangible and intangible form with just a thought. He could also turn it into an energy that covered every part of his body and every cell. It could provide his body with a powerful vitality, so that he had an extremely terrifying self-healing ability and was almost immortal. Hongjun even discovered a power that Luo Fan had not specifically designed. That was, he could actually use the Yellow Turban Emperor's incomparably rational and fast thinking to think about problems and deduce techniques. This was not a mistake on Luo Fan's part, nor was it Hongjun's self-created power. It was because the Yellow Turban Emperor refined by Luo Fan had 36 restrictions. It was only one step away from becoming a magic weapon, which was equivalent to a cultivator who had achieved Dao fruit. This state was obviously higher than Hongjun in terms of realm. Therefore, in Luo Fan's view, the Yellow Turban Emperor's thinking, and rationality were only ordinary and passable. It was not even half as good as the Limitless Boy. But for Hongjun, that kind of thinking, and rationality were several times higher and stronger than him. With the help of the Yellow Turban Emperor to think about problems and deduce techniques, it was equivalent to improving his thinking, and rationality to the point where he was only one step away from achieving Dao fruit. The moment he became one with the Yellow Turban Emperor, Hongjun was shocked by its power. Feeling the power of the immortal body, his admiration for Luo Fan almost exceeded that of Pangu, the immortal body. This kind of power can actually be realized through a magic weapon, and this is only the power of the Yellow Turban Emperor at the level of a magic weapon. If the Yellow Turban Emperor becomes a magic weapon, what kind of power will it have? In this state of worship and admiration, Hongjun began to refine the magical artifact embryo that he had been wearing for more than 10 years. After being constantly nourished by the mysterious energy in his body for more than 10 years, this magical tool embryo had already gained many mysteries. It was only missing the guidance of spells, talismans, and restrictive spells before it could become a real magical tool. Hongjun, who already had an immortal body, had reduced his requirements for defense to a minimum. After using the thoughts and thinking of the Yellow Turban Hercules Emperor, he decided to sacrifice this robe-shaped magical artifact embryo into an offensive magical artifact. The art of supporting heaven and earth contained 18 methods of application. These 18 methods of application were specially created by Luo Fan, according to the nature of the art of supporting heaven and earth. They were most suitable for this cultivation method. If it was inserted into the artifact embryo, it would allow Hongjun to unleash 120% of its power. In fact, there were no special requirements for the Dharma arts needed to refine a Dharma artifact. Almost any Dharma art could be used, be it for offense, defense, refining, formation, or cultivation. It was just that the power exerted by using different nature of the Dharma arts for sacrificial refining would be different. Hongjun naturally did not worry about this kind of power. This Dharma art was specially created for him. No matter how strong or weak the Dharma artifact was, it would definitely be able to exert super powerful power in his hands. Therefore, he randomly chose and decided to directly insert 9 of the 18 methods of application into the magical artifact embryo. After that, he sacrificially refined it for 49 days before he finally succeeded. He let this magical artifact embryo break free from the cocoon and become a mysterious magical artifact. After becoming a magical artifact, this robe turned into a brocade handkerchief. Hongjun named it 9-Spirit Cloud Light Handkerchief. It had 9 kinds of powers, such as flying, trapping and sealing, summoning thunder and fire, and blowing wind and turning into the sea. The power was so impressive that Hong Jun simply couldn't bear to put it down. For more than 10 days after the sacrificial refining was completed, he constantly familiarized himself with the power of this magical artifact in order to be able to use it to perfection. At this moment, it was already the 100th day after Luo Fan bestowed the magical artifact. It was also the time when the tribulation came. At noon, Hong Jun, who was meditating, was suddenly filled with an indescribable sense of danger and pressure. A strong sense of terror was transmitted into his godly soul, which made his godly soul tremble slightly. In the spirit space of the Wuji Palace, 100 years was 100 years. Luo Fan didn't do much in 100 years. He was just immersed in his memory, looking through the various Dharma arts, and completing the Dharma arts that he had left behind in the past. Now he was getting more and more familiar with this kind of life with endless time. In 100 years, what he had achieved was only completing the cultivation of a transformation Dharma art. At the moment when Hong Jun's Heaven's Tribulation came, Luo Fan suddenly had an idea. He pinched his fingers and calculated. Then he knew that Hong Jun's Tribulation was coming. His mind moved slightly, and his body was already out of the spirit space of the Wuji Palace. Standing in the void, he looked down at Hong Jun. 2 golden lights were emitted from his eyes and covered Hong Jun. In an instant, he had seen every change in Hong Jun from the inside to the outside, from the sea of consciousness to the tip of his hair. As I expected, the yellow-turbaned strongman was refined to become one with a weapon in 49 years. Although there are some problems with the sacrificial refining method of this magic weapon, it is almost impossible to upgrade it to a magic weapon, but its power is quite good. Luo Fan secretly weighed in his heart. He was talking about the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief. There was no problem with the Dharma arts that Hong Jun inserted into the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief, but there was a big problem with the way he inserted it. This was because all he did was imbue these spells into it in one gulp. At most, he only controlled them slightly and allowed them to become one with a magic tool embryo. This kind of refining method caused the connection between the various Dharma arts to be very rough, and there were many flaws. Although at this time, the power of this magic weapon was quite strong, because of the flaws in it, it lost the possibility of going further. After RI, even if he added various materials for sacrificial refining and inserted more Dharma arts, he could only upgrade it to the peak of the magic weapon. It was impossible for it to produce spiritual awareness and become a magic weapon. The correct way was to break down and reorganize these Dharma arts, just like how Luo Fan refined the yellow turban strongman. He had to build layers of restrictions, then insert them into the magic weapon embryo and fuse them with it. In that case, each Dharma art would be closely related to the magic weapon materials and other Dharma arts, forming an organic and mysterious whole. Those flaws would naturally not exist. Only in this way, this magic weapon had the possibility of becoming a magic weapon. However, these were all small problems, and there was a way to make up for it after RI. Luo Fan didn't think it was a big deal, so he just pretended not to know and didn't correct him. His eyes flashed, and the 2 golden lights disappeared. His vision had returned to normal. Long live Master. Seeing Luo Fan appear, Hong Jun bowed. No need to be so polite. Your heaven's retribution this time is the gung metal lightning fire retribution. It will last for 6 hours. The power is quite impressive for you, so you need to be careful. Luo Fan nodded and advised. With Luo Fan's realm, at this moment, Hong Jun's heaven's retribution was no longer a secret to him. Gung metal lightning fire. Hong Jun repeated. After a while, he said, "Thank you for your guidance, Master." With Luo Fan's guidance, he already knew how to deal with this heaven's retribution. Just as Hong Jun finished speaking, an invisible vortex suddenly appeared above Hong Jun's head, and an extremely terrifying aura came out from it. The first retribution of Hong Jun's Dao fruit, the gung metal lightning fire retribution, had arrived. Chapter 47. After the invisible whirlpool appeared, it expanded rapidly and became more and more obvious and terrifying. A sense of extreme danger appeared in Hongjuan's heart, causing his body to almost tremble uncontrollably. Even Luo Fan, who hadn't left yet, felt a sense of impending danger enveloping him, telling him that if he didn't leave, he would suffer endless blows. Although he didn't care about this endless blow, this was Hongjuan's tribulation after all. Luo Fan didn't want to turn the tables. He moved his mind, and the infinite void palace turned into a purple-yellow light. With a roll, it wrapped around his body. With another flash, it had already taken him out of the range of the heaven's retribution. Suspended in the void, Luo Fan's heart was filled with interest. After all, this was the first time he watched someone go through the heaven's retribution. Even if Luo Fan had seen through the true face of the heaven's retribution and even calculated the entire process of the heaven's retribution, he couldn't suppress the curiosity in his heart. After Luo Fan left, all the power of the heaven's retribution was added to Hongjuan's body. The terrifying feeling of impending disaster and the arrival of a mountain rain became even more intense and obvious. In the blink of an eye, the whirlpool had already expanded to a radius of 100 acres. Almost half of the mountain was covered in it. The sunlight that shone down from the sky was distorted by the whirlpool, causing most of the mountain to look a little illusory. Suddenly, a golden light appeared in the center of the whirlpool. After this golden light appeared, it expanded at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it had already filled the entire whirlpool, causing the originally illusory and formless whirlpool to become solid, turning into a sea of gold. This golden light was extremely intense and tyrannical. It fluctuated wildly in the entire whirlpool, twisting and flowing. Luo Fan looked at it from the side and knew that the whirlpool had already twisted the space, forming a very strange spatial fault that connected to the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer in the sky. And that golden light was the incomparably pure Gung Jin divine thunder. It even leads to the first layer of the astral wind, thunder, and fire layer. As expected, Luo Fan thought to himself. At this time, Hongjun didn't have Luo Fan's leisurely mood. The moment the Gung Jin divine thunder appeared, he felt that the feeling of impending disaster was extremely strong and terrifying to the extreme. His entire body couldn't help but tremble. An incomparably heavy pressure acted on every part of his body, like invisible shackles, locking up his entire body, locking up every cell in his body. It was impossible for him to even move an inch. This is the heavenly tribulation. This is 1/10,000th of the power of the heavenly tribulation that Master once encountered. It's too powerful. This thought flashed through Hongjuan's mind. However, it was only a flash. At this moment, he no longer had any spare energy to grieve for the autumn. Kacha! An incomparably terrifying and massive explosion resounded from within the golden light, shaking the surrounding heavens and earth. Then, a golden thread the size of a thumb emerged from the vortex. In the blink of an eye, it crossed a distance of 1,000 feet. Before Hongjun could react, it had already hit his head. The Gung Jin divine thunder was extremely strong, fierce, brilliant, and sharp. When this thumb-sized Gung Jin divine thunder hit his head, it instantly swept through every part of Hongjun's body. Every cell turned into countless tiny needles and sharp swords that pierced into every cell. With a soft sound, wisps of smoke were emitted from Hongjun's body. These cells were unable to withstand the bombardment of the Gung Jin divine lightning at all. They were instantly blasted apart, and the various substances within turned invisible and evaporated. Fortunately, before this, Hongjun had already become one with the yellow turban Hercules Emperor. The vitality energy of the yellow turban Hercules Emperor had already enveloped every cell of his. The moment the cells were broken, the vitality energy that covered his whole body instantly separated and integrated into the cells. In the blink of an eye, the cells recovered. Moreover, the recovered cells seemed to be stronger than before, just a tiny bit more than before. The whole process was extremely fast. Almost as soon as the cells were broken, they were restored by the vitality energy. However, the pain caused by the process didn't weaken at all. The moment the Gung Jin Divine Thunder entered his body, Hong Jun felt as if his body was instantly crushed, and his entire divine soul suffered a strong impact. Although this impact didn't reach the intensity of the protection of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it still made him feel very uncomfortable and almost unbearable. With the appearance of this Gung Jin Divine Thunder, the sound of crackling continued. The huge golden vortex was like rain, pouring out countless golden threads of divine thunder. Like a funnel, it directly hit Hong Jun's body and integrated into it, destroying everything it could and killing everything it could. Hong Jun sat cross-legged. He didn't use his power to resist, nor did he take out his magic treasure to resist. He just looked up at the sky and endured the waves of lightning bombardment with his physical body. Every time a ray of lightning entered his body, he experienced the pain of his body being crushed and reassembled. Every time lightning entered his body, he felt that his body was strengthened a little. The Gung Jin Divine Thunder that struck down from the sky became stronger and stronger, more condensed, and more powerful. In less than 2 hours, the Gung Jin Divine Thunder had already grown to the size of pillars. It descended from the sky and enveloped Hongjuan's entire body within it. The extremely strong Gung Jin Divine Thunder could not only hurt the physical body, but could also attack the divine soul. Unknowingly, the Gung Jin Divine Thunder had already broken through the barrier between the physical body and the divine soul. Every time, a trace of Gung Jin Divine Thunder, through some mysterious mechanism, rushed straight into Hong Jun's sea of consciousness, wreaking havoc, stirring, and constantly attacking his divine soul. Under the protection of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, Hong Jun's divine soul was not in any danger of collapsing. But that was all. The pain of the Gung Jin Divine Thunder hitting his divine soul did not weaken at all. More and more divine thunder struck his body, and the pain of his divine soul became more and more intense and terrifying. All of a sudden, the golden vortex in the sky underwent an abrupt change. A white light was produced from the center of the vortex and gradually spread. In a breath's time, it engulfed the entire 100-acre vortex. The entire golden vortex, which was originally shining with golden and white light, was dazzling, as if it had turned into a sea of fire. It looked very gorgeous. At the same time, a wave of heat descended from the sky, enveloping Hong Jun and roasting his body. Then, countless pillar-sized golden and white light rays fell from the sky and hit Hong Jun's head, instantly engulfing his entire body. Fire. Hong Jun received these light rays, and this word suddenly flashed in his mind. At the same time, a burning feeling emerged from all parts of his body, engulfing every cell in his body. His cells, which were already used to the bombardment of the Gung Jin Divine Thunder, were instantly turned into charcoal. An indescribable pain was transmitted from all over his body to his mind. His sea of consciousness turned into a sea of gold and white fire at that moment. It was extremely hot and extremely dangerous. The burning flames and the surrounding golden light fused with each other, entangled with each other, and constantly erupted with power several times more than before, bombarding his divine soul. His entire divine soul was instantly wrapped in white flames, turning into a white, flaming man. Gung Jin, lightning, fire, tribulation. So that's how it is. Hong Jun instantly understood what was going on. The self-healing ability that the yellow turban Hercules Emperor gave him was quite amazing. Even if there was such a sudden and rapid change, he could react in an instant and repair his body. After the thunder fire bombarded him, in the blink of an eye, all the cells in his body had completely returned to normal. Furthermore, after his body was repaired this time, the extent of his improvement was a little greater than before. The sea of fire in this sea of consciousness was so strong, but it finally triggered the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light above. In other words, Hong Jun's divine soul could no longer withstand such intense thunder, fire tempering. At the moment when the white flames and golden light entangled Hong Jun's divine soul, the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light turned and absorbed all the flames that entangled his divine soul into it, disappearing into nothingness. This change made the divine soul, which had been feeling pain all the time, suddenly feel refreshed. At this moment, Hong Jun understood that he could no longer use heaven's retribution to temper his divine soul without any resistance. He had to use a magic weapon to weaken the thunder fire in order to achieve the tempering effect. He suddenly moved his mind, and the robe on his body turned into a brocade handkerchief that rushed up. In an instant, it expanded to the size of 100 acres. As if covering the sky and earth, it completely enveloped the 100-acre whirlpool above. Then, it was the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief that Hong Jun had refined into 49 ri. After this brocade handkerchief wrapped around the whirlpool, it suddenly changed into a 100-acre lake. The endless lake water floated above the void, surging, bursting out with an earth-shattering momentum, and rushed straight to the huge whirlpool. At the same time, traces of purple lightning entangled every wave of the lake, like thunder, tyrannical, facing the Gung Jin divine thunder and white heavenly fire that descended from the sky. This 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief was integrated with 9 spells, and it had 9 kinds of power. What Hong Jun relied on was the law of the mutual restraint of water and fire, and the repulsion of the same. Originally, I wanted to write more about Hong Jun's retribution tribulation in more detail, and also integrate some of my ideas into it. But after thinking about it, there shouldn't be too many people who want to see Hong Jun's retribution tribulation for too long, and not too many people want to see the main character disappear for too long, so I gave up. The next chapter is called Invisible Rune Ghost. Chapter 48. The power of this lake surrounded by lightning was amazing, but it did not completely offset the heaven's retribution. It only weakened the Gung Jin divine thunder and white heavenly fire a little, but there were still countless lightning and heavenly fire that penetrated the barrier of the lake and hit Hong Jun directly. It was not that the power of this celestial device was not enough, but the result of Hong Jun's deliberate control. Although the heaven's retribution was extremely dangerous, and if one was not careful, it might be beyond redemption. But at the same time, it also had a great opportunity. If used well, it was enough to improve his strength. Hong Jun opened his eyes wide and looked up at the sky. The lightning and flames hit his body, making him seem to have an extra golden armor. There were even white flames burning on it, burning the surrounding primordial chi. The weakened Gung Jin divine thunder and white heavenly fire were still amazing, and they could still cause great damage to his body and soul. But it had been weakened to the extent that he could bear. The Gung metal divine thunder and white heavenly fire struck down from the sky like a torrential rain, densely packed, penetrating the lake that was entwined with lightning. It seemed to have weakened a lot, but it was only a little less. The scene was still shocking. They struck Hong Jun's body and penetrated in without any resistance. Not only did they sweep through every cell of his body, but they also rushed into his sea of consciousness through a mysterious mechanism. After being weakened by the 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief, the power of the Gung Jin divine thunder and white heavenly fire had weakened to the extent that they could not trigger the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. They impacted his soul, causing his soul to feel endless pain while being tempered. Needless to say, the Gung Jin divine thunder and white heavenly fire that swept through every cell of his body were constantly repaired by the yellow turban Hercules Emperor and constantly improved. Luo Fan looked at the scene of Hong Jun's retribution and could not help but nod secretly. Hong Jun used the celestial device to weaken the power of the heaven's retribution. Although the timing was not perfect, it was still decisive. It was enough to show his firm will and accurate judgment. Suddenly, Luo Fan's blood rushed to his head. The yin-yang test method didn't need him to think about it. It directly flowed through his mind, and a mysterious secret flashed in front of his eyes. You want to take advantage of me? Luo Fan calculated and grasped that bit of heaven's secret. He already understood what was going on, and he couldn't help but feel angry. After the previous observation, he already had an understanding of Hongjuan's strength and wisdom, so he was not worried that Hongjun would not be able to survive the Gungjin thunder and fire tribulation this time. At this moment, he knew that something was coming to take advantage of him, but he could already split his energy to deal with it, and he didn't need to stay by Hongjuan's side to protect. After making up his mind, he shouted, "Where is the Wuji boy?" A light flashed in the void, and a fair-skinned boy appeared out of thin air in front of Luo Fan. He bowed and waited for Luo Fan's instructions. "Keep an eye on Gu Hongjun. Don't let his life be in danger." Luo Fan didn't waste any time and directly instructed. "Understood." Wuji boy bowed and replied expressionlessly. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure turned illusory and turned into a ray of golden light. He suddenly rushed forward and merged with the purplish-yellow light. He was reintegrated into the Wuji Palace of Void. After Luo Fan finished instructing, he looked at Hongjun again, and his figure flashed. He turned into a long rainbow and rushed to the mountain peak where Hongjun was. At the moment when he entered the mountain, he used the earth escape technique, and his figure was like a fish in the water. After that, like a fish swimming at the bottom of the water, he sank to the ground easily. 1,800 miles. Luo Fan's destination, which was the existence that intended to take advantage of him, was located 1,800 miles underground. This distance had exceeded the perception range of Luo Fan with the help of the Wuji Palace of Void to enhance his perception. If it was a normal day, Luo Fan definitely wouldn't find out the abnormal situation there. But now, with the help of the yin-yang measurement method, which was a mysterious technique to calculate the mysteries of heaven, he could find out the abnormal situation at that location. He knew that something was quickly shuttling to the location of Hongjuan's tribulation with malice. This wasn't Hongjuan's tribulation. Luo Fan had already understood this point after many calculations. Hence, he interfered to deal with this existence, regardless of Hongjuan's tribulation that needed training. The distance of 1,800 miles wasn't too far for Luo Fan. If he was on the ground, he could cross it in a blink of an eye. But it was different underground. It was dozens of times harder to move underground than on the ground. Even with the Earth escape technique, it took Luo Fan a long time to get to the 1,500 miles. At this time, he happened to meet the existence that was rushing to Hongjuan's position with malice. Luo Fan took a long time to sink 1,500 miles. The existence that was full of malice was not slow. In a short while, it had floated more than 150 miles. What is this? Luo Fan could not help but be slightly surprised when he saw that thing clearly. Although he knew that there was something full of malice that wanted to take advantage of him, he didn't know what it was, nor did he know what it looked like. At this time, it was the first time that he saw it. It was also the first time that he knew that there was such a strange existence in this world. He couldn't see what it was at all. Neither the countless legends and the memories he brought from Earth, nor the common sense that Pangu's original spirit left in his head based on the actual situation in the primordial world told him what the thing in front of him, which was emitting a strong een and turbid air, was, and what characteristics it had. The continuous strange laughter passed through the layers and entered Luo Fan's ears. That existence was a very strange mass of matter, like an ink crystal. It changed constantly and was ethereal and invisible. Sometimes it turned into a stone with sharp edges. Sometimes it turned into a swimming fish in the water. Sometimes it turned into a stable and motionless grass. And sometimes it turned into a strange and ferocious beast. There were all kinds of strange and unpredictable changes. The speed of its changes was so fast that hundreds of changes appeared in almost every breath. Although he didn't know what this existence was, Luo Fan knew that it was a kind of living creature. It was a kind of living creature that was different from the innate gods and the cloud-shaped living creatures in the Gangfeng Lay Fire layer. Because this existence exuded a malice that even the slowest person could discover. And only living creatures would have malice. When Luo Fan saw the monster clearly, the monster also saw him clearly. Amidst the strange cackling, The monster's body rapidly changed, abandoning its previous transformations, and gradually turned into a jet black, lifelike Luo fan. Even the tiniest muscle lines were identical to Luo Fan's. Imitation? At this time, the anger in Luo Fan's heart had disappeared. Instead, he became interested, because he had found that although this monster was strange, its power was very low, even far less than that of Hongjun. To him, it was not a threat at all. Ga. The eyes of the ink crystal Luo Fan flashed with a deep light. It looked dull and crazy. It laughed strangely, opened its arms, and pounced on Luo Fan. This monster was perfectly integrated with the surrounding earth. Its body in the earth was like a fish in the water. It was relaxed and not blocked at all. Instead, it seemed to be able to use the surrounding earth to provide a faster speed and a stronger impact. Luo Fan was using the Earth Escape supernatural power. Under this supernatural power, his body turned into a very strange state. This state made him almost integrated with the Earth. There was no distinction between them, and no physical object could touch him. However, when a monster pounced on him, he actually felt an invisible strong wind blowing on his face, causing his hair and clothes to flutter backward. At this moment, Luo Fan understood that this monster could touch him in this state and hurt him in this state. This made Luo Fan secretly vigilant. He no longer had the thought of playing with this monster. He raised his hand, and an invisible force instantly appeared around the monster. It instantly locked the monster's entire body, making it unable to even move a finger. The monster god became extremely crazy. The ferocious god was like a devil. It was no longer letting out strange laughter, but continuous, angry roars. Its body also began to fluctuate and change shape. From the looks of it, it seemed like it could no longer maintain its original form and wanted to change into another form. Looking at the monster that looked like him showing such a crazy and ferocious side, Luo Fan could not help but feel a little strange. With a slight thought, he clenched his hand slightly, and the monster instantly collapsed. It turned into a ball of black smoke with a diameter of 1 meter. It was covered by an invisible spherical area, causing it to turn into a sphere and crazily surge and collide. Shrill screams came from it. It was extremely horrifying. A mantra suddenly flowed in Luo Fan's mind. In an instant, 2 golden lights shot out from his eyes, completely covering the smoke. In an instant, the appearance of the smoke was stripped away, and its origin was illuminated. So, it's the invisible rune ghost. How wonderful! In an instant, Luo Fan already understood what this monster was. As for the name of the invisible rune ghost, it came from the origin of this thing. It was like a label, and it was not named by Luo Fan himself. The core origin of this invisible rune ghost was nothing else but a complex, 3-dimensional rune. Chapter 49. This 3-dimensional rune was spherical, fist-sized, and dark. Its color was several times deeper than the surrounding black mist. The entire spherical rune was formed by hundreds of deep and tough energy lines. It looked very simple, but it was also very mysterious. It had a different kind of mystery. It flowed rapidly and changed constantly. It was very mysterious. Heavy, turbid rune. I see. Luo Fan looked at the spherical rune and inexplicably understood it. He instantly knew the name of the spherical rune. This heavy, turbid rune was the core of the invisible talisman ghost. It was also the place where the invisible talisman ghost's spiritual sense was located, and it was also the place where its memories were stored. Luo Fan could see through the origin and instantly saw through the nature of this heavy, turbid rune. With a thought, the memories of the invisible talisman ghost flowed through his mind and mind. He casually looked through them like a movie. So there is such a mysterious existence under the primordial world. As he looked through the memories contained in the heavy, turbid rune, Luo Fan could not help but be shocked. Through these memories, he found that there was a huge river that was thousands of miles wide, 4,900 miles underground. The water in this river was completely condensed from the extremely turbid chi and was turbid yellow in color. It meandered and flowed gently. It flowed out of nowhere and stayed in an unknown place. In this river, there were endless invisible talisman ghosts. These invisible talisman ghosts fought and devoured each other in this river, constantly growing and strengthening. Yellow Spring. This was the Yellow Spring. Through the memories of the invisible talisman ghost, Luo Fan found that only the name Yellow Spring could match this river. Only the meaning contained in this name could describe the nature of this river. Invisible talisman ghost, Yellow Spring, heavy turbid Inchi. There are actually such strange things in this world. I wonder if those invisible talisman ghosts are like this one. They only know how to kill, can't communicate, and don't have a complete spiritual sense. Luo Fan's eyes sparkled. He was very interested. After arriving in the primordial world, Luo Fan's mentality had long changed. At this moment, he only wished to see everything clearly in the world and observe the various changes in the primordial world. Through these observations, he would ceaselessly improve his cultivation, and in the end, attain the supreme fruit of the Tao and step onto the peak of the world. Now that he discovered such a strange yellow spring with such a strange formless talisman ghost, how could he not be interested? With a thought, he raised his right hand and clenched it. The invisible talisman ghost that was restrained instantly collapsed. Countless black mist spurted out from the black sphere, and an incomparably mournful scream came from it, rushing straight into Luo Fan's eardrums. Soon, all the black mist dissipated, revealing a simple and profound spherical rune. That was the formless talisman ghost that he had destroyed, leaving behind only this heavy, turbid talisman, which was the core of the formless talisman ghost. With a wave of his left hand, Luo Fan spread out his sleeve and absorbed the heavy turbid talisman into the void created by his sleeve universe. His posture looked extremely carefree. Although he still did not know what the heavy turbid talisman was used for, Luo Fan knew that it would definitely be of great use, and it must be extremely precious. At least, it would not be inferior to the earth essence that he used to refine the Wuji Palace. Naturally, he would not let go of such a treasure. After collecting the heavy turbid talisman, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. His figure rushed down at an extremely fast speed towards the place he was very interested in, the Yellow Spring that was 4,900 miles underground. At this moment, Luo Fan did not know how thick the earth of the primordial world was. However, he found that the ground was simply a treasure. Moreover, it was a treasure with endless treasures. There were the essence of the 5 elements, the evil chi, the earth fire, the ores, and so on. There were even countless chaotic energy sources of various sizes lying quietly in various parts of the ground, waiting to be excavated and released. The deeper he went underground, the more treasures there were. Although there were all kinds of treasures in the ground to a depth of 1,500 miles, there were not too many of them, and they were not very densely distributed. In addition, Luo Fan did not pay attention to them, so he did not feel much. However, when he went 3,000 miles underground, a rare refining material would appear almost every few hundred feet, and an existence that would absolutely be regarded as a priceless treasure in the future would be placed in front of Luo Fan. At first, Luo Fan was very excited. He collected every one that he encountered, and every one that he found, he collected it. In less than 1,000 miles, he had already filled the void created by his sleeve universe. When the void was filled, he realized that his actions were really unnecessary. He did not believe that this randomly chosen mountain peak was in a special position, and he did not believe that the number of treasures here was much more than in other places. It seemed that the situation was similar in the underground of the entire primordial world. If he wanted to use these materials and treasures, he could choose a random place and go underground to get them. Why did he have to go through so much trouble to collect them? This way of doing things was too stingy. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan shook his head and gave up this method. He no longer cared about the refining materials and all kinds of treasures around him, and rushed straight into the ground at full speed. In a short while, he had already reached a depth of 4,900 miles underground, and finally saw the yellow spring that existed in the memory of the invisible talisman ghost. Seeing the yellow spring, Luo Fan was completely shocked. A yellow river, thousands of miles wide and millions of miles long, flowed before his eyes. That magnificent scene rushed straight into his mind, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. This yellow spring was surrounded by a layer of earthy yellow light shield, completely isolating it from the surrounding ground. This light shield was composed of extremely pure and condensed earth essence. It was thick, gentle, and tough. And at this moment, the position facing Luo Fan, which was perpendicular to the mountain peak, seemed to be a little weak. At least, it was much weaker than other places. When Luo Fan looked at it, there were tens of thousands of ever-changing invisible talisman ghosts madly attacking the weak position, one after another, and the weak position was shaky. With a move of his mind, the mantra of the yin and yang calculation method flowed through his mind. Luo Fan pinched his fingers and calculated. In the blink of an eye, he knew that this weak position was caused by Hongjun, who was 4,900 miles above him, undergoing the tribulation. A mysterious connection appeared between the netherworld and Hongjun. As a result of this connection, it was as if there was an invisible force that was constantly weakening the Earth energy shield. Suddenly, there was a crisp sound. The weak position suddenly collapsed, and a small hole with a diameter of 1 foot appeared. An invisible talisman ghost laughed strangely, rushed out of the small hole, and rushed up quickly. As the invisible talisman ghost rushed out, the hole instantly closed and returned to its previous thickness, blocking the other talisman ghosts that were planning to follow the invisible talisman ghost and rush up. With one look, Luo Fan knew where the invisible talisman ghost that he had destroyed before came from. Seeing that the talisman ghost had turned into his own appearance, Luo Fan shook his head slightly, raised his hand, and the invisible talisman ghost instantly collapsed. The black fog dispersed and turned into a heavy yin talisman the size of a fist. After a careful look, he found that this heavy yin talisman seemed to be a little simpler than the previous one. Chapter 50. It seems like the invisible talisman ghosts are differentiated by the complexity of the heavy turbid yin talisman. Luo Fan understood. With a wave of his left hand, he covered the fist-sized heavy turbid yin talisman and put it into the void created by the sleeve universe. He didn't stop. After putting it into the yin talisman, his figure flashed and rushed into the chi of the earth. The chi of the earth was so tough and impenetrable to the invisible talisman ghosts, but to Luo Fan, it was like a water curtain that couldn't stop him at all. The chi of the earth was the origin chi of the earth. The earth escape technique allowed him to move in the earth. He could move and swim. It wasn't a big deal for him to pass through the chi of the earth. Once he entered the yellow spring, he was instantly submerged by the spring water. The earth escape technique lost its effect completely, and his body became solid again. At the same time, there was an endless cold and turbid aura that wrapped around him, making him feel extremely cold. He felt as if his body was being pressed down by a mountain. The entire yellow spring was filled with the pure spring water that was condensed from the endless heavy, turbid, and extreme yin chi. This spring water had an extremely strong corrosive effect on the body. After entering it for a few breaths, Luo Fan felt his body go numb and numb. His agility was greatly reduced. He couldn't help but be shocked. The earth immortal Tao fruit in his body shook and rolled a few times. An invisible membrane appeared on the surface of his body, isolating him from the surrounding yellow spring water. At this point, Luo Fan felt his body return to normal. Although the invisible talisman ghosts were endless, they were insignificant compared to the yellow spring. In addition, the place where Luo Fan entered was a few miles away from the weak spot. Therefore, no invisible talisman ghost discovered Luo Fan's existence for a long time. The formless talisman ghosts within 100 miles were still attacking the weak point, as if they were desperate to escape from the yellow springs. This heavy and turbid chi of extreme yin seems to counteract innate vital chi and chaotic vital chi, and it's even to the extent that innate Taoism constitution can't withstand it. It's truly marvelous. Luo Fan sensed the quality of the Nether Springs water and pondered in his heart. At this moment, the sounds in the surroundings stopped. It became unimaginably quiet. Only faint, strange laughter, roars, and screams could be faintly heard in the distance. Luo Fan looked around in surprise, only to find that tens of thousands of shapeless rune ghosts were staring at him from a few miles away. Moreover, the form of each invisible rune ghost was gradually changing at the same time. Soon, countless black jades piled up and formed the shape of Luo Fan. Their appearances were vivid and lifelike. Even the most minute patterns on their skin and the style of their hair were the same. The only difference was that their expressions were incomparably malevolent, crazy, and even somewhat lifeless. Luo Fan sighed. Fighting with these formless talisman ghosts that could transform into his own form really didn't feel good. At this moment, the formless talisman ghosts had all taken their forms. They let out strange cackles and pounced toward Luo Fan. Fine, I also need more heavy and turbidine talismans to study. Since you've come to me, don't blame me. Luo Fan sighed and waved his hand lightly. An invisible force was produced and acted on the formless talisman ghosts. Puff, 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 puff. A series of muffled sounds rang out, and the surrounding Yellow Springs water surged. Ripples were produced one after another, and wave after wave of waves surged. Boundless black mist burst out, and one after another, the formless talisman ghosts were crushed by that formless force and turned into source energy. They dispersed in all directions, and in the end, they were stirred up by the Yellow Springs water in the surroundings, and with a single breath, they fused into it. Luo Fan didn't use any magic arts. He just relied on his body's innate magical power and instinct after attaining the earthly immortal's Tao fruit and attaining the connate Taoist aptitude. It was enough to deal with these invisible talisman ghosts. The gap between the invisible talisman ghosts and Luo Fan was too big. With this movement, countless incomparably shrill screams came from where the formless talisman ghosts were and rushed straight into Luo Fan's ears. Hearing these shrill screams, Luo Fan didn't move at all. His expression was as calm as ever, and his movements didn't have the slightest hesitation. These formless talisman ghosts only knew how to kill and devour each other. Although they could be called living beings, they didn't have a complete spiritual consciousness. They couldn't even compare to the yellow-turbaned strongman who had only refined one layer of restrictions. He didn't feel the slightest psychological pressure in killing them. Although the formless talisman ghosts were black in color, their essence was also heavy in qi. It was only through some kind of wonderful change, through special compression and purification, that it appeared to be different from the surrounding spring water. At this time, after being blasted by Luo Fan, its body automatically returned to its origin and naturally integrated into the spring water. After a while, the tens of thousands of talisman ghosts that pounced over disappeared completely. They turned into tens of thousands of heavy-yin talismans and stayed where they were, quietly floating there. Luo Fan took a look and found that there were no fish that had escaped the net. With a wave of his left hand, he opened his big sleeve and covered the tens of thousands of heavy-yin talismans and put them into the void created by the sleeve universe. Although he had collected a lot of refining materials along the way and had already filled the void, there were some gaps between the various materials, and it was enough to store the tens of thousands of fist-sized heavy-yin talismans. As the surrounding formless talisman ghosts were cleaned up, the surrounding area of more than 100 miles became very quiet, and there were no more formless talisman ghosts. Only more than 100 miles away could he see a sparse number of formless talisman ghosts shuttling back and forth unconsciously, killing. The sleeve universe is still too small. It's a little difficult to store the heavy-yin talismans now. Since I collected so many materials previously, I can refine it again and expand the void by a few times. Luo Fan thought to himself. With this thought, the Dharma power in his body shook, and an invisible force suddenly erupted from his body, forcing the surrounding spring water away, forming a spherical vacuum area with a radius of 100 feet around his body. Although he could also refine it in the spring water, it was not as easy as in the outside world. With a thought, in the void of the sleeve universe, a 5-foot-wide, greenish-brown north wind raw stone suddenly shook, broke out of the void, and appeared in front of Luo Fan. The materials that Luo Fan used to refine the sleeve universe last time were Gungjin Divine Thunder and Imu Heavenly Fire. They were all pure materials collected from the astral wind lightning fire layer. Although they seemed to be everywhere in the untainted land, they were still very precious. The wind helped the fire, and the fire borrowed the wind. Thunder and fire complemented each other, and wind and thunder generated each other. If he wanted to use new materials to expand the void, the most suitable thing was wind. Therefore, using this north wind raw stone to refine the sleeve universe could achieve the best effect. With this thought in mind, the sleeve universe mantra flowed in his mind. Then his left sleeve instantly shook and collapsed, turning into a large black and brown cloud. Countless talismans flashed and shuttled back and forth in the cloud. At this moment, the strange laughter became louder and louder, reaching Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan looked out and saw the formless talisman ghosts 100 miles away, madly rushing towards Luo Fan's position as if they had taken stimulants. Looking at the momentum, it was even crazier than when the formless talisman ghosts attacked the chi of the earth. Countless thoughts flashed in Luo Fan's mind. In the end, he smiled helplessly. It turns out that these formless talisman ghosts were attracted by the Gungjin Divine Thunder. Although he still did not know why these formless talisman ghosts were so eager for the Gungjin Divine Thunder, it was not the time to delve into it. He waved his left hand, and the grayish-brown cloud, flashing with countless talismans, suddenly shrouded the north wind raw stone, instantly swallowing it. Crack, crack, crack! With a crisp sound, black smoke constantly rose from it and rushed into the spring water above. It was washed by the spring water, and finally turned into small balls of sand and stones. The spring water rushed and swayed, and then it sank to the bottom of the spring. Chapter 51. At this moment, the invisible talisman ghosts that were rushing over had already reached Luo Fan. Boom, boom, boom. The moment the invisible talisman ghosts got close to Luo Fan, they collided with the invisible force. In that moment, massive explosions sounded out from all directions as the formless talisman ghosts exploded one by one, creating incredibly powerful shockwaves that shook the surrounding yellow spring water and caused intense waves to ripple. These invisible evil spirits looked ferocious, but they were much weaker than Luo Fan. They couldn't even withstand the invisible force released by Luo Fan. After colliding with this layer of invisible force, it instantly collapsed and scattered. Its body turned into the heavy and turbid extreme Yin Chi of the origin and merged with the yellow spring. Only the turbid Yin talismans were left on the spot, spinning around. From what Luo Fan saw, the reason why these invisible talisman ghosts fought and bit each other in other places was to obtain the turbid Yin talismans from other invisible talisman ghosts. But at this time, these invisible rune ghosts seemed to have been completely blinded by the temptation. They continuously rushed towards Luo Fan. Even if they collided with the invisible force, causing their heads to bleed and their bodies to collapse, they still didn't give up. They were even more dismissive of the heavy, turbid Yin talisman that they had been longing for. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan's body was surrounded by hundreds of heavy Yin talismans. These talismans revolved around the 10-foot diameter vacuum around his body, just like a planet revolving around the sun. Although Luo Fan was refining the world in the sleeve, he still paid attention to the situation around him. Seeing this scene, with a thought, a brand new talisman that had never appeared before took shape in his mind. Then, it was instantly shot into the cloud that covered his left hand. The timing of the talisman entering was just the moment when the world in the sleeve was about to be completed. After the talisman entered it, crackling sounds could be heard continuously. The cloud suddenly shrank, condensed, and formed a sleeve that looked the same as before, wrapping around his left hand. The way of mutual promotion and restraint is really mysterious. Just by adding the North Wind Raw Stone, I can actually open up a void that is 10 times the size. After sensing the size of the world in the sleeve, Luo Fan seemed to have understood something. In such a short period of time, the tens of thousands of invisible talisman ghosts that were rushing over were all dispersed by the invisible force, leaving only tens of thousands of turbid Een talismans spinning around. Because there were so many heavy Een talismans, they stacked on top of each other and almost covered his entire body. With a thought, Luo Fan, that invisible force instantly disappeared. The yellow spring water lost its resistance and rushed straight over, hitting the layer of invisible membrane on the surface of his body. Then Luo Fan waved his left hand and opened his big sleeve. The tens of thousands of turbid Een talismans were instantly absorbed into the void of his world in the sleeve. After the 2 rounds of sweeping just now, there were no more invisible talisman ghosts in the surrounding hundreds of miles, except for the yellow spring water. It became a large, empty space. Suddenly, Luo Fan's blood flowed, and a kind of enlightenment appeared in his heart. He already knew that Hongjun had just successfully passed the first tribulation, the Gungjin lightning fire tribulation. Raising his head, he saw that the weak part of the earth energy shield that was created by Hongjuan's heavenly tribulation had completely recovered to its original thickness and toughness. This finally made Luo Fan completely relax. Although he was sure that Hongjun would definitely pass this tribulation, who knew if there would be any accidents before he passed it? Therefore, before that, he had a vague concern in his heart. That place had returned to normal. For the invisible talisman ghosts, it was no longer tempting to leave the Yellow Spring. Naturally, they would not regard it as a destination. The invisible talisman ghosts that were gradually gathering in the distance lost their destination and began to circle around. Luo Fan had a flash of inspiration just now and added a little function to the world in the sleeve. Now that he had nothing to do, he wanted to try it out. With a thought, his figure flashed, and in a few flashes he had already appeared 1,000 miles away. Here, there were dozens of constantly changing invisible talisman ghosts fighting with each other. At this moment, an invisible talisman ghost had already been torn into several pieces and was being devoured by several invisible talisman ghosts. The source of the invisible talisman ghost, which was the heavy turbid Een talisman, was being fought by dozens of invisible talisman ghosts. The intensity of the fight had already caused the dozens of invisible talisman ghosts to collapse. With a thought, Luo Fan opened his left sleeve, and a faint golden light flickered in the depths of his big sleeve. An extremely strong Gungjin heavenly thunder aura arose spontaneously. At this moment, all the invisible talisman ghosts that were fighting and devouring the heavy turbid Een Chi suddenly stopped. Then, they turned to face Luo Fan. In an instant, dozens of black jades piled up to form Luo Fan appeared in front of him. Strange cackles sounded at the same time. It was the invisible talisman ghosts that instantly stopped what they were doing, twisted their bodies, and rushed towards Luo Fan. It really works? Luo Fan saw this and could not help but smile, feeling very satisfied. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Just as he was thinking about this, the dozens of invisible talisman ghosts had already formed a funnel shape and rushed straight into his left sleeve, directly rushing into the void opened up by the world in the sleeve. With a slight tremble, mournful screams sounded. The dozens of invisible talisman ghosts had already collapsed, and rolling black fog rushed out of the big sleeve, directly merging into the Yellow Spring, and the dozens of heavy turbid Een talismans directly entered the void opened up by the world in the sleeve. This is much easier. With a thought, everything in the world in the sleeve appeared in Luo Fan's mind, and he found that everything was as he had expected. He could not help but be overjoyed. The power of luring the invisible talisman ghosts and collecting them just now was not the power of the world in the sleeve itself. It was the talisman that Luo Fan had inserted at the end that was working. There is no need to explain the principle. It was just using the material of the left sleeve that contained the Gungjin Divine Thunder. Although it was just a small trick, it had already brought endless relief to Luo Fan. At least, he no longer had to worry about the annoyance that the invisible talisman ghosts brought him. As long as he opened up the world in the sleeve, these invisible talisman ghosts would automatically drill into the jar and collapse into heavy, turbid talismans from the beginning until now. Luo Fan had stored more than 20,000 heavy turbid talismans in the world in the sleeve. It was enough to use them to study the nature of the heavy turbid talismans. The spring water of the yellow spring was no longer a threat to Luo Fan, and the invisible talisman ghosts were too weak, so they had no effect on him. Therefore, Luo Fan did not bother to leave, and directly sat cross-legged in the spring water. His mind and consciousness cut into the world in the sleeve, and he began to examine the more than 20,000 heavy, turbid talismans. Luo Fan had already achieved the earthly immortal Tao fruit, and his thinking speed was extremely fast, and his reasoning ability was also extremely strong. It did not take long for him to deduce the nature of the heavy, turbid talismans from a more than 20,000 heavy turbid talismans. These talismans were impressively a very strange magic art. This kind of magic art was born from heaven and earth, and it could transform the baleful chi and turbid chi between heaven and earth into an ownerless spiritual consciousness and bind it in the talisman. It also had the ability to devour other talismans to strengthen its own power. The reason why the invisible talisman ghosts were formed was that this ownerless spiritual consciousness had absorbed too much turbid chi in the yellow spring water that was completely condensed from the heavy turbid chi, and it naturally condensed into the body of the invisible talisman ghosts. And the reason why these invisible talisman ghosts were so eager for the Gung Jin Divine Thunder was that as long as they integrated traces of thunder and lightning into the heavy turbid talismans, they could dispel the excessive influence of the heavy turbid chi, and they could even give birth to a relatively complete spiritual consciousness that could grow continuously like a baby. As for the requirements for thunder and lightning, it did not matter what kind of thunder and lightning it was, whether it was the Gung Jin Divine Thunder, the Wu Earth Divine Thunder, or the First Wood Divine Thunder. Even the most ordinary lightning could help it achieve its goal. It was just that the degree of completeness of the spiritual consciousness after absorbing different types of thunder and lightning was different. It's really amazing. If there are countless heavy turbid talismans, then wouldn't I be able to create different kinds of living beings? You can create different kinds of living beings? After understanding the function of the talisman, Luo Fan was greatly shocked, and he suddenly had a ridiculous idea. Chapter 52. Lightning was extremely rare in the Yellow Springs, but could be found everywhere on the ground. To Luo Fan, as long as he had enough heavy turbid talismans, he could easily purify enough complete spiritual senses. At that time, he could give these heavy turbid talismans bodies at will, which was equivalent to creating enough living beings at will. Even if they were to form a race, it would be an extremely easy task. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan put down this seemingly ridiculous idea. Why did he want to create a race? The primordial world was so vast, and there would definitely be a lot of races. How could there be a lack of the few that he had created? These invisible talisman ghosts could devour each other to strengthen themselves. If I fuse these heavy, turbid talismans with each other, I wonder what will happen in the end. Luo Fan thought to himself. Any natural object definitely contained endless mysteries of heaven and earth. Especially in the primordial world, when yin and yang were first distinguished, it was even more so. Although Luo Fan had deduced the power and various characteristics of these tens of thousands of heavy turbid talismans, because of the profoundness of these heavy turbid talismans, he could not completely deduce its principle and essence. Naturally, he did not know what kind of scene the heavy turbid talismans would eventually develop to its peak. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. With a thought, an invisible force was forced out, forming a vacuum with a radius of 30 feet around his body. Then, he chose the most complicated and powerful one among the more than 20,000 heavy turbid talismans. With a wave of his sleeve, he placed it in front of himself. The spiritual sense contained in this heavy turbid talisman was already extremely strong. Although its body had been shattered, causing its spiritual sense to have no place to rely on, and no aura of living beings could be emitted. But after it appeared, it was lively in front of Luo Fan, spinning around like a headless fly. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently pointed. A golden bolt of lightning rushed out of thin air from his finger. In the blink of an eye, it rushed into the heavy and turbid Een talisman. That bolt of golden lightning was naturally the Gung Jin Heavenly Thunder. Attracting lightning was too easy for Luo Fan. Don't forget that his robe was condensed by the Gung Jin Heavenly Thunder and the Yi Wood Heavenly Fire. As the Gung Jin Divine Thunder rushed into the Een talisman, an incomparably mysterious aura emanated from the turbid Een talisman. A life force that even ordinary creatures could sense was slowly being generated in this heavy and turbid Een talisman. Like the first judgment of Yin and Yang, and also like the beginning of heaven and earth, this heavy and turbid Een talisman gradually produced an inexplicable change. The originally dark and deep spherical rune gradually flashed a bit of golden light. At first, the golden light only appeared at the very center of the rune. Then, it rapidly spread along the lines that formed the rune. Gradually, it spread to every part of the rune. This spread caused the Een talisman to gradually turn into a golden pill the size of a fist. Wow, like a baby's silent cry, it was transmitted into Luo Fan's mind. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a heartbeat gradually came into Luo Fan's ears. Along with this beating sound, the golden pill also slightly pulsed like a water pump or like a heart stretching and contracting. An inexplicable feeling appeared in Luo Fan's mind. This kind of feeling was a kind of feeling of witnessing the birth of life, witnessing the formation of spiritual consciousness. It was like seeing one's own child being born. I didn't expect this process to be so wonderful. Feeling touched, he couldn't help but secretly sigh. Suddenly, his mind moved, and a bit of spiritual light condensed from his mind came out from between his eyebrows. In an instant, it was imprinted into the golden pill. With the imprint of this thought, the golden pill suddenly burst out with an incomparably rich, dark golden light. This dark golden light continued to strengthen, gradually becoming dazzling, making people unable to look directly at it. All of a sudden, a cracking sound rang out. The dark golden light that filled Luo Fan's eyes suddenly retracted, and a small, thumb-sized baby appeared where the golden pill had been. This little baby was fat and chubby, and his skin was very pink and rosy, making him look extremely cute. Dad, Dad! The baby looked at Luo Fan with two clear and innocent eyes, and said such words that almost made Luo Fan collapse. He carefully recalled the thought that he had imprinted into the golden pill before. It simply contained information about the born Taoism aptitude, and there was no other information at all. Where did the word Dad come from? Dad, Dad! The little baby opened his arms and called out with a smile, as if waiting for Luo Fan to hug him. Fine, fine. You were born because of me, so you could be considered my son. What's the harm in recognizing you as my son? Luo Fan could not bear to reject such a cute baby, so he could only sigh and raise his thumb in front of the baby. The baby was only the size of a thumb, and when Luo Fan raised his thumb, he hugged it as if he was hugging a large pillar. It looked very awkward, but he looked very satisfied. When he came into contact with this baby, Luo Fan realized that this baby was completely made of flesh and blood. It was completely different from what he had thought before, which was that it was made of pure energy. It seems that the profound mystery of the heavy Een talisman is beyond my imagination. Luo Fan suddenly had this kind of understanding. The baby hugged Luo Fan's thumb and moaned with great satisfaction. He giggled, "Ha, Dad, Dad." Listening to this young, crisp, but full of trust, Luo Fan's original plan of letting the baby devour the heavy Een talisman to grow and strengthen to the peak was no longer able to continue. It seems that I have to find another way to see what this heavy Een talisman will look like when it is upgraded to the peak. Luo Fan thought to himself. His mind moved, and a section of the mantra flashed in his mind. From the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, a magical power unit separated from it and began to circulate in his meridians in an extremely mysterious path. After a full 81 cycles, this tiny magical power unit had already expanded tens of thousands of times and finally turned into a transparent gas that gradually condensed in the palm of his right hand. With a slight shake of his right hand, this transparent gas suddenly rushed out of his palm and condensed into a fist-sized, transparent, and extremely complicated talisman in his hand. This talisman was spherical in shape, and inside it was a spherical void with a diameter of 10 feet. Although the volume of this void was extremely small, it was filled with rich, innate vitality. Looking at the amount, it was even enough for an ordinary person to live for as long as 1,000 years. As this invisible spherical talisman was formed, Luo Fan gently sent the baby who had been giggling into the talisman. After the baby entered, his size suddenly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, he looked like a speck of dust. As expected, Luo Fan looked at the baby and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After the baby entered the spherical talisman, it was as if he had returned to his mother's womb. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, mumbled a few times, and curled up his body, breathed evenly, and stopped moving. Obviously, he had entered a deep state of sleep. The magic art that Luo Fan had just displayed had a very strange name: Noonday Rest Technique. It was a magic art that opened up the void for living beings to rest, and its power was very mysterious. The size of the void opened up by this magic art was far inferior to other magic arts, such as the Sleeve Universe and the other 36. However, it was the most stable type, and it could be maintained for the longest time. It was just right for Luo Fan's cheap son to live in. Let me say something from the bottom of my heart. It takes courage to turn one's thoughts into words and post them on the internet for everyone to appreciate and criticize. What makes an author who can persist on spending a few hours a day writing words that can be read in a few minutes? I don't know about others, but for me, it's satisfaction. It's the satisfaction of seeing one's own words and ideas being recognized and liked by everyone. I'm not face-to-face with everyone. If I want to know whether my work has been recognized and liked by everyone, I can only measure it through the clicks, favorites, and recommendations of the book. If there are too few clicks, favorites, and recommendations, it will be a moderate blow to me. Of course, I won't just TJ this book, but the missing points in the writing will definitely be affected. If the missing points in the writing are affected, the written words will definitely not be as good. This is human nature. I think everyone understands. Yes, after saying so much, I actually just want to vent my frustration and ask for support. If everyone thinks that this book is still worth reading, then click, vote, and favorite it. Chapter 53. With a wave of his hand, the talisman transformed from the midday rest technique, rushed into the void created by the universe in the sleeve. Luo Fan had absolute control over the void created by the universe in the sleeve, so he didn't have to worry about the heavy turbid talisman harming him if he used the midday rest technique. Although he couldn't bear to use the method he had previously thought of to understand how far the heavy turbid talisman could go, Luo Fan didn't give up on his desire to explore it. With a thought, he instantly retracted the invisible force that he had forced out of his body. The void around him, with a diameter of 30 feet, was once again filled up by the surrounding spring water. Then he took a step forward. His figure was like moving clouds and flowing water, covering more than 100 miles in a single step. In just a few dozen steps, he had already entered another area where the invisible talisman ghosts were wreaking havoc. There were hundreds of invisible talisman ghosts engaged in an intense battle. Luo Fan's concealment ability was extremely strong. After entering this battlefield, none of the talisman ghosts actually discovered his existence. Looking at the muddle-headed, invisible talisman ghosts that only knew how to devour and strangle each other, Luo Fan sighed helplessly. He raised his left hand and shook it lightly. The universe in the sleeve opened, and a golden light flickered in the depths of the void. With the appearance of this golden light, the scene that happened before happened again. All the fighting invisible talisman ghosts instantly gave up on their opponents and turned into the shape of Luo Fan, pouncing towards him and rushing into the universe in the sleeve like a funnel. Soon, all the surrounding happy ghosts were wiped out. He shook his sleeve a few times, and countless black fog gushed out of his big sleeve, completely merging into the surrounding spring water. This was the method that Luo Fan thought of. This yellow spring was thousands of miles wide, tens of millions of miles long, or even hundreds of millions of miles long. The number of invisible talisman ghosts in it was indescribable. It could be imagined that with so many of them, there would definitely be talisman ghosts that had devoured other invisible talisman ghosts and grown close to the peak realm. The simplest way to find a talisman ghost at such a peak realm was to kill. Killing until blood flowed like rivers and the nether springs were emptied would naturally draw the attention of the peak stage talisman ghost, and it would naturally allow the peak stage talisman ghost that was hiding somewhere to appear before him. Moreover, doing this would allow him to obtain countless dancing talismans, so it wasn't a waste of time. Luo Fan's killing spree lasted for 3 years. During these 3 years, Luo Fan had killed more than 50 million invisible talisman ghosts. The yellow spring that stretched for millions of miles around him had been completely cleared by him, and no formless talisman ghost could exist in this area. Although the space inside his sleeve was 10 times larger than before, it was still a little crowded with 50 million fist-sized heavy impure talismans. Floating in the yellow spring, Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all, and he seemed very calm. Killing millions of invisible talisman ghosts didn't cause him any psychological pressure. In his opinion, these shapeless talisman ghosts were simply existences that possessed incomplete spiritual sense, and they couldn't even be considered as living beings. Annihilating them was equivalent to crushing a rock into powder. Could it be that a person would feel any psychological pressure because of this? It's been more than 3 years. It's about time. Luo Fan stood in the water and thought to himself. In these 3 years, he had been killing these invisible talisman ghosts non-stop, and at the same time, he was paying attention to all movements in the yellow spring, waiting for the invisible talisman ghost that had absorbed and grown to the peak. The reason why he stopped killing at this time was because he had a sudden inspiration when he was killing the invisible talisman ghosts. He had a premonition in his heart. This premonition made him understand that his goal was probably about to succeed. Ha! Just as Luo Fan finished thinking, a grand and strange laughter drifted and gradually echoed in his ears, as if the whole world was filled with this strange laughter. It was very shocking and huge. Listening carefully, this strange laughter seemed to be the fusion of millions of invisible talisman ghost laughter. Not only was it grand, but it was also very orderly, making it quite shocking to listen to. This strange laughter naturally didn't have any effect on Luo Fan. With a faint smile on his face, he turned his head to look at the upper reaches of the yellow spring. Even though this strange laughter was extremely loud and erratic, with Luo Fan's cultivation that had attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit, how could he possibly be unable to notice the direction this strange laughter came from? Right at this moment, in the distance, a huge dark cloud that was 1,000 miles wide suddenly appeared out of nowhere 100 miles away. It was so huge that it filled up the entire yellow spring. Then, it rushed towards Luo Fan's position at an extremely fast speed, as if it was teleporting. In the blink of an eye, it crossed a large distance, and in the blink of an eye, it crossed another large distance. Luo Fan frowned slightly. Looking closely, he found that this large black cloud was actually formed by countless invisible talisman ghosts. These countless invisible talisman ghosts lost their bodies and intertwined with each other, fusing together in a very strange way. This whole body was very complete, to the point that Luo Fan could only occasionally see that it was not a natural whole from its shape changes. I was wondering what it was. So it a newly formed talisman ghost. At this moment, a leisurely sigh came from the black cloud. With this sigh, the large black cloud had already arrived in front of Luo Fan and stopped 100 feet away from Luo Fan, facing Luo Fan from afar. Form talisman ghost. Luo Fan frowned. This term was quite strange, but it seemed to contain some special charm. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this term and did not respond to the voice, the large black cloud surged and gradually split open, forming a fissure that was 30 feet wide. The location of this fissure happened to be in the direction of Luo Fan's position in the black cloud. This fissure was at least a mile long, and it extended straight into the depths of the black cloud. He, amidst the leisurely sigh, although the surrounding invisible talisman ghosts were still laughing strangely, they had already lowered their voices to the extreme. Countless sounds intertwined together, but it only formed an existence similar to background music. It did not affect the conversation at all. There was no need to say much about Luo Fan's strong eyesight. The moment the fissure split open, he could see through the fissure to the situation in the depths of the black cloud. It was a throne. It was 30 feet wide, and the back was 30 feet long. It was carved with countless mysterious, beautiful, ugly, ferocious, and vulgar reliefs. It was filled with an indescribable profundity, and it gave off an attractive aura. On this throne sat a humanoid figure. It was 15 feet tall, and its face was extremely ugly. It had 2 spiral horns on its head, and its skin was covered in scales. Its entire body gave off an aura of being that controlled everything, and it was an existence that was superior to everyone else. When Luo Fan saw this existence clearly, this existence also saw Luo Fan clearly. It rested one hand on the armrest of the throne to support its chin, while the other hand was placed on its thigh. It was tapping lightly, and it seemed to contain some sort of rhythm. 2 large eyes that were like copper bells looked at Luo Fan, and there was an indescribable feeling in them. It seemed to be greed, familiarity, and pity. It's the same kind. After becoming a visible talisman ghost, devouring more invisible talisman ghosts is useless. This has been proven through my personal experience over the past 10,000 years. Although this existence was extremely ugly and ferocious, its voice was very gentle, and could even be said to be filled with magnetism. The same kind? I'm not the same kind as you. Luo Fan finally heard what the existence called him, and he could not help but laugh. At this moment, the throne had somehow crossed the distance of a mile along the fissure and arrived in front of the black cloud. Chapter 54. My form talisman ghosts are formed from formless talisman ghosts devouring their own kind to grow and evolve. You are the first companion I've met in tens of thousands of years, and you can be said to be my only hope for further growth and evolution. I've been waiting for you for 100,000 years. Do you think I won't let you go just because you deny it? The formless talisman ghost didn't change at all. It was still sitting there leisurely, propping its chin and tapping its thigh. Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense. A mantra flowed through his mind. His eyes shot out 2 beams of golden light, like searchlights, and covered the formless talisman ghost. In an instant, a thick black fog appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes. The mystique that could see through formations and illuminate the source actually failed on this formless talisman ghost. With a thought, the 2 beams of golden light from Luo Fan's eyes became even more intense and dazzling. The power of illuminating the source also became even stronger. This strengthening allowed him to see some things that he couldn't see before. After seeing more, he understood why his mystique had lost its effect. This mystique is really mysterious, and it doesn't seem difficult to do. After seeing it clearly, Luo Fan was eager to give it a try. The formless talisman ghost seemed to be sitting alone on the throne, but in fact, its aura and energy had completely fused with the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts around it. The throne looked solid, but in fact, it was constructed from extremely pure and turbid yin qi. It had a mysterious connection with the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts in the dark clouds, completely connecting their powers together. This allowed the formless talisman ghost on the throne to use the power of the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts at will. The reason why Luo Fan couldn't illuminate the source of the formless talisman ghost was because the formless talisman ghost hid itself in the depths of the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts. To see through the formless talisman ghost, one had to first see through the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts. No matter how strong this mystique that could illuminate the source was, it would always be limited by Luo Fan's cultivation. Luo Fan's Earth Immortal Dao fruit level was clearly not enough for him to completely see through the hundreds of millions of formless talisman ghosts, although he couldn't see through the source. Based on what he saw and the countless spells in his memory, Luo Fan was already confident that he could deduce a spell with the same effect. So that's how it is. Is this the divine ability you obtained after you gained a tangible form? It seems like it can only see through formations. It's much worse than mine. The talisman ghost seemed to have been lonely for too long. Unexpectedly, it didn't have the slightest anxiousness as it chatted with Luo Fan. Are you the only formless talisman ghost in the entire Yellow Springs? Luo Fan retracted his magical ability and suppressed the excitement in his heart. He didn't answer the question of the talisman ghost, but instead calmly asked, Mystique, Mystique, Mystique. But from what I've seen in the past 100,000 years, I'm the only one that can turn formless into something tangible. I wanted to continue walking, but I found an aura that made me panic. I could only wait for you to appear within 100 million miles. The formless talisman ghost was also very calm. It actually answered all of Luo Fan's questions. You're waiting for the formless talisman ghost to appear, not me. Luo Fan smiled. Sigh. Looks like your spiritual consciousness is still incomplete. You can't inherit the wisdom in the Een talisman. I said so much, but I still can't get you to inherit it. What a pity. I wanted to communicate with my own kind, but I didn't expect to meet one who doesn't even know what he is. Boring, boring. The formless talisman ghost said disappointedly. As it spoke, it lifted the hand that was hitting its thigh to the side of its head. Then it flicked its wrist and waved forward. A large cloud with a radius of 300 meters separated from the dark clouds. After the clump of cloud separated from the cloud, it quickly condensed into a 30 feet tall figure that looked exactly the same as Luo Fan. Then, with a loud crash, it landed 10 feet in front of Luo Fan. To be able to devour 10 million talisman ghosts, your strength is certainly not weak. I wonder if you can fight against 10,000 formless talisman ghosts. Let me see your strength. The formless talisman ghost said calmly and leisurely. Quack, quack, quack. The 30-meter-tall figure cackled strangely. He grasped the air with both hands, and a 5-meter-long spear appeared in his hand. Then, with a shake of the spear, countless spear shadows shrouded a radius of 100 jong. Like a waterfall, they covered the sky and covered everything. When Luo Fan saw this, he could not help but be greatly surprised. Not only was the spear shadow fast, but it also conformed to some mysterious principle. Every spear strike, every tremble, contained endless mysteries. Even the Yellow Springs were sealed, so within a radius of 100 jong, there was not a single place that could allow an ant to escape. Moreover, the power of the spear shadows was restrained to the extreme. It looked vast and earth-shattering, blocking people's vision as if there was infinite power erupting at any moment. But in fact, the power contained in the spear shadows did not leak at all. As long as it did not hit the target it chose, there would not be any dissipation, and there would not be any wastage. This, however, contained all the mysteries of the spear techniques. If this set of spear techniques was sorted out, it would be enough for an ordinary mortal. In the future, there was no such person in the current primordial world to cultivate and enter the Tao. Although it would not allow him to attain the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, it was definitely possible for him to absorb Khanate Essence Qi and cultivate an immortal body for 10,000 years. It seems that the tangible talisman ghost has spent all its time figuring out the martial Tao. Luo Fan had a guess when he saw it. At the same time, he had a rough idea of the abilities of the tangible talisman ghost. Although the spear technique was mysterious, it was nothing to Luo Fan. He raised his hand and pointed. A Dharma power unit rushed out of his finger and turned in the air. It turned into a 3 feet tall Bujo mountain floating above his head and emitted billions of rays of light. The power of the 10,000 invisible talisman ghosts had already exceeded the range that Luo Fan could deal with his asterisk talent. However, it could not compare to even the weakest Dharma power unit. The endless spear shadows bombarded the rays of light. The infinite power contained in them was instantly triggered, producing an extremely powerful shock wave that spread in all directions. However, the effect was like a noodle hitting a steel plate. It could not cause any damage to the seemingly fragile rays of light. Instead, the spear's shadows shattered and gradually scattered. The waterfall-like spear shadows that covered an area of 100 feet gradually shrunk and faded away. In the end, it turned into a spear. It pointed straight at the top of Luo Fan's head, the 3 feet tall Bujo Mountain. Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed at the Bujo Mountain above his head. A golden spear rushed out from the Bujo Mountain. With a sudden tremble, 36 spear shadows appeared and wrapped around the black spear held in the hands of the 3 feet tall figure. This Bujo Mountain was essentially a complicated and mysterious three-dimensional talisman seal. It was also Luo Fan's Dharma power unit. It was formed by the condensation and compression of a higher level of energy than primal chaos chi. Over the years, it had absorbed an unknown amount of primal chaos chi and innate vitality chi. When these energies entered the Dharma power unit, they were naturally assimilated and transformed into an indescribably wonderful energy. The various spells, techniques, and divine abilities that Luo Fan had cultivated over the years, except for some of the more commonly used ones, were basically hidden in these Dharma power units. This golden spear was condensed from the indescribably wonderful energy that Luo Fan had casually needed. Whether it was toughness or toughness, it was no less than well-tempered steel. Chapter 55. The trajectory of the 36 spear shadows was mysterious and unpredictable. Although it was very different from the waterfall-like spear shadows from before, the essence of the two was the same. In fact, the trajectory of the golden spear was even more mysterious. Astonishingly, with just a glance, Luo Fan had already completely grasped the essence of the spear technique. He had even compressed it, turning the endless spear shadows into 36. Most of the power contained in the black spear had been triggered by the billions of rays of light. At this moment, the power contained in the spear had been weakened by more than 90%, and it was being twisted by the 36 spear shadows. In an instant, a powerful explosion erupted, and a boundless shockwave erupted from it and swept in all directions. Following that, the black spear was completely shattered and returned to its origin. The black mist was completely absorbed by the surrounding yellow spring. The 36 spear shadows didn't stop because of that. Instead, they continued to charge forward and strangled the 10 tall figure. They were like a silk net that wrapped around the figure. As soon as the net contracted, shrill cries of anguish rang out from within, and boundless black mist spread out in all directions before being devoured by the yellow springs and disappearing without a trace. Luo Fan gently pointed, and the 36 spear shadows instantly disappeared, revealing a dazzling golden spear. It floated in the air and pointed straight at the place where the talisman ghost was located. At the tip of the spear, there was a strange, heavy, turbid talisman. This heavy turbidine talisman was at least 10 times larger than an ordinary heavy turbidine talisman. It looked like a basketball as it spun around the tip of the spear randomly. Clap, clap, clap. Soft applause came from the front. Luo Fan looked and saw the talisman ghost clapping in surprise. It seemed to be admiring Luo Fan's ability. I didn't expect your innate ability to bring such power. You should know that I spent tens of thousands of years perfecting this spear technique. You actually learned it with just a glance. I want to know how much my strength will increase after devouring you. The talisman ghost seemed very excited as it spoke. At this time, Luo Fan was not interested in explaining that he was not of the same kind. He had been in the primordial world for tens of thousands of years, and during this period of time, his improvement was so great that it was astounding. However, he had not fought with anyone before this. In other words, he didn't have a direct understanding of how powerful the magic arts he cultivated were and how he should use them to their fullest potential. At this time, this talisman ghost had clearly spent all its energy on figuring out martial arts, and its mastery of martial arts had reached an unimaginable level. It just so happened that he could use it to sharpen his combat ability and hone the techniques that he had cultivated over the years, completely transforming them into his own combat power. What other moves do you have? I'm a little interested now. Luo Fan smiled. He opened his big sleeve and covered it, putting the heavy, turbid talisman on the spear tip into his sleeve. If 10,000 invisible talisman ghosts aren't enough, then I'll use 100,000 at once. The talisman ghost was expressionless. He raised his hand and waved gently like before. Another large mass of black fog rushed out of the dark clouds and rapidly condensed in midair. It turned into a figure that was the same size as Luo Fan and looked exactly the same as Luo Fan. Apart from the color of his body, there was no difference between him and Luo Fan at all. This figure was holding a large saber. Although it was 2/3 smaller than the previous one, its entire body was domineering and looked more than 10 times stronger than the previous one. As soon as this figure appeared, it let out a strange laugh. Moreover, without any hesitation, it suddenly pounced towards Luo Fan, raised its hand, and slashed towards Luo Fan. This slash looked very ordinary. There was no gorgeous saber shadow, nor was there any dazzling saber light. It looked very simple, as if it was just a simple slash. However, this slash was so natural. Under this slash, the person who was hit even felt like being hit by this slash was like a drop of water falling to the ground. It was an unstoppable and irresistible rule. When Luo Fan saw this, he was inwardly surprised. This slash actually contained an extremely mysterious saber technique. It was not inferior to the previous set of spear techniques at all. Moreover, because this figure was 10 times stronger than the spear-wielding figure from before, it made this move even harder to block and resist. With a thought, the golden spear flashed in the void out of nowhere and turned into 6 spear shadows, entangling the large saber from 6 directions. In that instant, the broadsword also gave birth to countless changes. It was like an antelope hanging its horns, but also like a divine stroke. With a light swing and a flash, in an impossible situation, it simultaneously blocked the 6 spear shadows. It blocked the attacks of the 6 spear shadows, and it was unable to advance a single bit further. Fortunately, that set of spear techniques was not inferior to this set of saber techniques at all. With just a thought from Luo Fan, the spear shadows flashed and turned, and then split into 6, adding up to a total of 12. Following a mysterious trajectory, they attacked the seemingly perfect saber technique's flaw. This saber and spear moved in a flash in the battlefield within a radius of 1,000 feet. In the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged more than 10,000 moves. That saber technique was naturally mysterious and unfathomable. However, the spear technique was not at a disadvantage, and they were evenly matched. Neither of them could do anything to the other. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. In the Buzhou mountain above his head, a golden saber rushed out. With a swoosh like a natural wind blowing past, it lightly brushed past the black shadow wielding the saber. Impressively, it contained the essence of the black shadow saber technique, and it was even more concise and mysterious. Chi 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 chi. Countless crisp sounds rang out. The figure wielding the saber, along with the saber, instantly collapsed, turning into countless black fog. It tumbled and was completely swallowed by the surrounding yellow springs water. Only a heavy talisman that was 100 times larger than an ordinary one was left on the spear tip. The size of this heavy talisman was so large, it was the size of 10 basketballs. It was unknown how the black shadow, stuffed it into the body that was the same size as Luo Fan. What a pity. I originally wanted to play with you, but your talent has already made me afraid. I have no confidence that I can use martial arts to kill you, so I can only rely on the strongest power. At this moment, the tangible talisman ghost let out a sigh. Luo Fan also felt that it was a pity in his heart. It seemed that his earlier performance had already made the tangible talisman ghost wary, and he could not continue training like this. It is indeed a pity. This is such a good opportunity to train. Luo Fan sighed. At this moment, although the tangible talisman ghost did not move, the throne he was sitting on had undergone a huge change. It was as if it had become a black hole, crazily absorbing all the black fog around it. At the same time, the various strange carvings on it gradually emitted a faint black light, and the countless strange creatures carved on it seemed to have come to life. They began to struggle, twist, and howl. A stronger and stronger aura was emitted from the tangible talisman ghost. The surrounding yellow springs were suppressed by this aura to the point of stagnation, as if they could not move at all. Luo Fan did not care about the changes at all. His expression did not change at all, and he quietly floated there. At most, he only raised his hand and pointed, and the golden spear and the golden saber returned to the Buzhou mountain above his head. Not long after, the large black cloud in front of Luo Fan that was thousands of miles wide and who knows how many miles long was completely devoured, and all of it merged into the tangible talisman ghost throne. At this moment, the aura emitted by the tangible talisman ghost was so strong that it affected the surrounding area, causing the yellow springs within 1,000 miles to seem to have become cement, completely solidified and unable to flow at all. Luo Fan measured for a moment, and knew that even if he gave it his all, he could at most achieve 1/10 of the tangible talisman ghost's power. He secretly sighed in his heart. The tangible talisman ghost's face also showed an extremely comfortable expression, as if it was in control of everything. Ha ha! Although I have tried countless times, I am still fascinated by this power every time. The tangible talisman ghost laughed loudly. As he laughed, the throne he was sitting on also emitted a formless roar, and the entire throne trembled slightly, like a tiger before it pounced on its prey. The countless strange creatures carved on it had all come to life, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws in the throne, letting out soundless roars. The billions of light emitted by the Buzhou mountain above Luo Fan's had completely resisted this terrifying aura, so this aura could not affect him at all. His expression was calm, as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, Luo Fan shouted, "Where is the limitless boy?" "The limitless boy is here, obeying master's orders." An emotionless, robot-like voice floated over. "Subdue this ghost." Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed at the tangible talisman ghost and said casually. Chapter 56. Understood. The emotionless voice of the limitless boy drifted over once again. "Take me." Just as the talisman ghost expressed his doubts, a disdainful smile appeared on his face, and he opened his mouth slightly, as if he was about to sneer. A square palace that was 100 feet tall suddenly fell from the sky and instantly covered him. Then, the square palace suddenly shrank, and the talisman ghost was sucked into it. There was a couplet on the left and right side of the square palace. Doubt turns into the void body of the universe. It was Luo Fan's only magic treasure, the Infinity Void Palace. The speed of the Infinity Void Palace was extremely fast. Luo Fan was less than 2,000 miles away from the ground, and the horizontal distance was less than 10,000 miles. He only needed one move, and the Infinity Void Palace would be able to reach this distance in a short while. When he was waiting for the talisman ghost to transform, he summoned the Infinity Void Palace. Therefore, the Infinity Void Palace could appear at the right time. Luo Fan looked at how the limitless Void Palace easily collected the talisman ghost with a faint smile on his face. The limitless Void Palace was a magic treasure, and it could even increase Luo Fan's perception by 50 times, calculated according to the distance. Taking care of a talisman ghost that was stronger than Luo Fan, but did not have a magic treasure, Would it not be as easy as flipping one's hand? Let me out. Kill. Kill. A muffled roar faintly came from the limitless void palace. After that, a boundless killing intent emanated from the limitless palace and enveloped an area of 10 meters around it, causing the space within this area to seem as solid as cement. Don't be noisy, or you'll be struck by lightning. The Infinity Boy's emotionless voice came from the palace. Luo Fan's heart moved. The scene inside the many thousand world appeared in his mind. He saw that the talisman ghost was in the void billions of miles away from the mainland. It was sitting on the throne. Its expression was both frightened and angry. Where was the ease and confidence he had when he was facing Luo Fan? His aura was so strong that it was 10 times stronger than when he had first appeared. It covered a radius of 10,000 kilometers, causing the space within 10,000 kilometers to seem to be completely isolated from the outside world. The limitless palace's aura that leaked out from the void was formed precisely because the limitless palace's aura was too strong and leaked out from the mini kiliacosm. Kill! Kill! Along with the sounds of killing, the throne beneath him shook violently. Billions of rays of black light shot out in all directions. The speed of the black light was extremely fast, and its power was also extremely impressive. Even the space of this minor dimension couldn't withstand it. As the black light rushed through, it slightly distorted. Lays here. The limitless boy's voice sounded. Then boundless earth element divine thunder was born in the void. These bolts of lightning were deep purple in color, and they fell like rain from the void, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. The corporeal talisman ghost's murderous voice stopped and turned into an incomparably shrill scream. The black light that shot out in all directions retracted in an instant and condensed into a layer of black light shield. It was 100 feet in diameter, and it wrapped around him and the throne he was sitting on. The deep purple earth element divine thunder was completely under the limitless boy's absolute control. It twisted and spiraled in the void like a spiritual snake, shattering the talisman ghost's aura. The talisman ghost's expression changed drastically, and its screams became even more shrill. Lightning was an elixir for the talisman ghost. As long as there was a trace of the most ordinary lightning, the talisman ghost could be purified, freeing itself from the corrosion of the heavy yin qi, and become a complete spiritual consciousness. However, when the invisible talisman ghost devoured countless of its kind and turned invisible into visible, his spiritual sense had completely fused with the heavy and turbid qi of extreme yin. When the thunder and lightning purified the heavy and turbid qi of extreme yin, it was equivalent to purifying his spiritual sense and killing it. As such, the lightning became the most vicious poison. The limitless boy was the treasure spirit of the limitless void palace. The limitless void palace, together with the small kiliacosm, was equivalent to his body. In this place, he was omnipotent, and it was extremely easy for him to know the talisman ghost's weakness. The earth element divine thunder he shot out came from the pool of lightning, and was more condensed and powerful than the earth element divine thunder in the outside world. The talisman ghost could not resist the divine thunder at all, and its aura was instantly shattered. What the hell are you? You can't be one of my kind. This is definitely not the technique of the talisman ghost. What the hell are you? The talisman ghost roared in fear, frustration, and anger. At this moment, the earth element divine thunder had already targeted the talisman ghost. Billions of bolts of lightning gathered together and blasted towards the blacklight shield that could only cover his throne. The blacklight barrier was formed by the power of over 100 million invisible talisman ghosts. Although it was completely restrained by the earth element divine thunder, there were too many of them, and the power was too strong. It would take some time to destroy it. Luo Fan sighed and said calmly, "When did I say that I'm one of your kind? The untainted land is so vast, and talisman ghosts are not the only ones with complete soul consciousness. I'm still lacking a servant. Are you willing to take up this position?" His words did not come out from his mouth, but from the power of the limitless void palace, which was condensed in the small kiliocosm with his mind. It seemed extremely majestic and grand. It was enough to shock the soul of any living creature. You want me to be your servant? Ha ha! The talisman ghost was slightly stunned, and then burst into laughter. It did not seem to be moved by the majestic and grand voice that suddenly appeared in the void. I command billions of talisman ghosts, and I have a supreme position in the Yellow Spring for nearly a yuan wei. Now you want me to be your servant? Your soul consciousness is in a mess, isn't it? The talisman ghost laughed for a while and said coldly, You would rather die than submit. I admire you very much. Luo Fan sighed. Then, with a thought, he took over the control of the limitless void palace from the limitless boy. With a thought, the billions of earth element divine thunder doubled in size. In an instant, the light shield formed by the black light was smashed into pieces. The talisman ghost let out a shrill scream. The 7 apertures of the talisman ghost spurted out a black liquid, which seemed to be its blood. At this moment, the billions of earth element divine thunder had already pounced on the talisman ghost, rushed into its body, and exploded. Boom, 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 boom. Billions of booming sounds merged into one, and endless black fog rolled out from it. In this black fog, there were even heavy talismans that were flying everywhere like billiards being hit. Luo Fan's mind moved, and an invisible force appeared in the void, drawing the heavy talismans that were splashing in all directions and collecting them. During this process, the shrill screams kept coming from the talisman ghost's mouth, and it was extremely horrifying. However, during this process, the talisman ghost didn't beg for mercy. It's useless. This small kiliocosm is under my complete control. The moment you entered this small kiliocosm, the result was decided. Either you die, or you surrender. You can't escape by dividing and hiding your soul consciousness like this, Luo Fan said calmly. The whole small kiliocosm was under his perception, and he knew that although the talisman ghost was screaming miserably, it didn't give up trying to escape. He divided his soul consciousness into thousands of parts and hid them in the heavy turbid talismans that were constantly shooting out. With the help of the surging power, he escaped from the earth element divine thunder. From a beginning until now, there were already hundreds of parts of his soul consciousness that had escaped. As soon as Luo Fan finished speaking, with a thought, an invisible force swept across the void. Poof, poof, poof. The hundreds of heavy, turbid talismans instantly exploded and directly shattered into black fog. Along with the shattering of the fog, the soul consciousness hidden within was also shattered. You dare to destroy my soul consciousness. I will never surrender. Explode. The talisman ghost finally lost all hope, and it roared. Chapter 57. Luo Fan sensed the change of energy and instantly grasped the thoughts of the talisman ghost. He sighed in his heart. Why is this necessary? So what if I become a servant? Why would I rather die than obey? Although he sighed in his heart, he didn't show any mercy. With a slight thought, the billions of Wutu divine thunders instantly condensed and twisted. In the blink of an eye, they formed a complicated and abstruse three-dimensional talisman, which directly imprinted on every part of the talisman ghost body. It locked every bit of energy and spiritual sense of the talisman ghost. Instantly, the talisman ghost became sluggish. It maintained its ferocious, desperate, angry, and crazy expression. Its movements were like a stone, stagnating there. The terrifying energy that was about to explode in its body was also instantly locked and stagnated. Where is the limitless boy? After sealing the talisman ghost, Luo Fan shouted. The limitless boy is here, master. The limitless boy's jade-like figure condensed in the void. Suppress this talisman ghost in the depths of the pool of thunder, extract the turbid chi of extreme and refine the mini kiliocosm. Luo Fan said calmly. Yes, master. The limitless boy naturally wouldn't ask why he did it. He just said it without any emotion. As he was speaking, he raised his hand and grabbed the huge talisman ghost along with the throw in his hand. It was like a chick catching an eagle. It looked very strange. Then, the limitless boy and the talisman ghost disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan's mind moved. He knew that the talisman ghost and the throne had already gone to the depths of the pool of thunder. The limitless boy had completely integrated into the Wuji Palace. He controlled every drop of thunder water in the pool of thunder, condensed them into countless chains, and locked the talisman ghost and the throne. He kept extracting the turbid chi of extreme Yin, and through some mysterious mechanism, he integrated it into the whole Wuji Palace. Although the turbid chi of extreme Yin was the opposite of thunder and lightning, the transformation of Yin and Yang between heaven and earth had endless mysteries. If this kind of turbid chi of extreme Yin was used well, it could greatly promote the growth of the pool of thunder. It could also continuously refine the entire Wuji Palace, making the mini Kiliacosm stronger. However, this required extremely precise control and transformation of the energy. If he just threw it down and left it alone, it would only cause a violent reaction in the pool of thunder. It might even cause a terrifying annihilation and cause the entire pool of thunder to explode. Of course, Luo Fan could easily complete such control and transformation, but he wouldn't waste too much time on it. Of course, the control and transformation could easily, but he wouldn't waste too much time on it. Following this change, the originally calm lightning pool seemed to have been injected with endless vitality. Waves began to appear, as if there were countless fish and prawns active in it. Luo Fan's mind moved. He took a step forward and entered the limitless Void Palace's minor thousand world. He sat on a platform and waved his hand. The doors of the limitless Void Palace opened wide, and endless yellow springs water gushed in from the palace. The yellow spring water was restrained by an invisible force in the sky. It floated above the continent and meandered like a ribbon. It was also like the Milky Way. It was bright and dazzling, shining brightly with a ball of light. Luo Fan looked up and secretly nodded his head. With a thought, he closed the palace gate. In that short period of time, the water from the spring of the underworld that entered the palace was already millions of tons. This amount was already huge. But even so, to the entire spring of the underworld, it wasn't much. When the door was opened, the spring water poured in, but didn't create a whirlpool. Even though the spring water didn't amount to much compared to the entire spring of the underworld, it was still strange. One look, and one would know that the spring water wasn't ordinary spring water. Though the water from the underworld was also formed by turbid chi of extreme Yin, in terms of purity, it couldn't compare to the talisman ghost. It couldn't even compare to the talisman ghost. Therefore, though it had the ability to refine the palace, it couldn't compare to the turbid chi of extreme Yin that was extracted from the talisman ghost. Using it to refine this treasure, the effect would be next to nothing. At this time, Luo Fan took the yellow springs water into his magic treasure, but he didn't want to use it to refine the magic treasure, but to refine it into a magic treasure. Though an artifact is mysterious, it doesn't have many restrictions on the materials used. Everything in the world, whether it's tangible or intangible, can be made into an artifact. The difference in materials only affects the power of the artifact. The water from the underworld was formed by turbid chi of extreme Yin. Naturally, it was no exception. It could be used as a material to make an artifact, and the power of the artifact won't be weak. Luo Fan pondered for a moment. Countless lights flickered in his mind and were annihilated. In the blink of an eye, he had already designed how to refine the artifact and what functions to give it. However, this wasn't the time to refine this artifact. According to his design, it would take at least 1,000 years to refine this artifact. This wasn't because the artifact was complicated, but because the amount of water from the underworld was too much. Millions of tons was not a small amount. With a thought, the memories of the limitless boy for the past 3 years unfolded in his mind. It was like watching a movie. Luo Fan completely understood Hongjuan's experience over the years. Hongjun went through the gung metal lightning fire tribulation 3 years ago. After that, he didn't move forward immediately. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the peak and began to stabilize his cultivation level. In these 3 years, his body didn't move at all. No matter how the wind blew, how the sun shone, and how the rain poured on him, he was calm and indifferent. Luo Fan didn't give the limitless boy the authority to monitor the energy flow in Hongjuan's body. Therefore, in the limitless boy's memory, there was no change in Hongjuan's cultivation level after the tribulation. What Luo Fan observed through the limitless boy's memory was only the surface situation. However, this already made Luo Fan very satisfied. After Hongjun went through the tribulation, his cultivation level had a certain improvement. This kind of improvement required him to stabilize his mind and cultivate. Therefore, it was a very correct choice to cultivate for 3 years after the tribulation. This period of time wasn't too long, nor too short. It was just right. With a thought, the limitless palace had already turned into a purple-yellow light and rushed up. Whether it was the underworld, the chi of earth, or the ground, they couldn't cause any hindrance to it. After a while, the purple-yellow light had already rushed out of the ground. Through the limitless palace's enhancement of perception, Luo Fan instantly found Hongjuan's figure more than 300,000 miles away. He controlled the light to turn, and after a while, it had already come to a place 30 feet above Hongjuan's head. It condensed into a square palace the size of a fist. Luo Fan sensed through the limitless palace, and the condition of Hongjuan's body appeared in his mind. Through the tempering of the Gangjin Thunderfire tribulation, Hongjuan's body had improved by 3 times compared to before the tribulation. Every smallest muscle seemed to be cast from steel wire. At first glance, one could tell that it contained infinite power. This was already a great improvement, but it was only secondary. The most important change was in the energy in his body. The mysterious energy in his body had already undergone a great change. In the midst of this constantly flowing energy, there were threads that looked like spider silk mixed in. These silk threads were light gray, covering every part of his energy. The silk threads were like a 3-dimensional silk net, constantly twisting in his energy, constantly circling, constantly sticking to each other, as if they wanted to form a certain shape, but they didn't have enough strength. When Luo Fan saw the change in the energy, he knew what was going on. These silk threads were trying their best to outline and stick to each other, try to condense into a 3-dimensional talisman, to transform all the energy in Hongjuan's body into spiritual power. It was a pity that although Hongjun had gone through a tribulation, his cultivation and realm were still not enough. Although he could condense the silk threads to outline the talisman, there was still a long way to go to construct it into a 3-dimensional talisman. Chapter 58. As his perception went deeper, the scene in Hongjuan's sea of consciousness appeared in Luo Fan's mind. As soon as he saw this scene, Luo Fan frowned, and he secretly blamed himself. He saw that this sea of consciousness, whether it was the height or the width, was more than twice as large as the last time he saw it. It seemed to be quite spacious. However, in the middle of this rather broad sea of consciousness, Hongjuan's divine soul was full of anxiety and annoyance. Strands of energy mixed with a large number of threads were produced from a mysterious location, constantly entering and exiting the soul's body. Every time these strands of energy entered and exited the soul's body, the anxiety and annoyance on the soul's face would increase. Its body would even tremble slightly, as if it was showing signs of instability. This was clearly the phenomenon of Hongjuan's realm being insufficient, but he had to forcibly condense 3-dimensional talisman to achieve spiritual power. This approach was undoubtedly extremely harmful to the divine soul. If it weren't for the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light above his divine soul that constantly released all kinds of mysterious power while rotating, and the yellow turban Hercules Emperor next to the divine soul emitted a green brilliance from time to time to nourish the divine soul, Hongjuan's divine soul would have suffered irreparable damage at this time. This result was Luo Fan's mistake. It was because Luo Fan did not fulfill his responsibility as a teacher. He did not tell Hongjun what would happen after the calamity and what to do. That was why Hongjun made this mistake. Luo Fan's mind moved, and his figure had appeared outside Wuji Palace, standing next to Hongjun. He raised his hand and pointed, and and a little spiritual light rushed straight into Hongjuan's eyebrows. It entered his sea of consciousness through a mysterious mechanism. It rushed again and instantly integrated into Hongjuan's divine soul. With the integration of this spiritual light, Hongjuan's mind was instantly clear, and he broke away from the previous state of being stuck in a dead end. Before he could think about the doubts, he slowly ran the indomitable heaven and earth technique and kept all the energy in his body into his lower abdomen. Only then did he have the strength to open his eyes. When he saw Luo Fan by his side, Hongjun quickly stood up and saluted with shame. Luo Fan nodded and said, "You need to remember the truth that speed is not speed. It is already a great opportunity for you to improve your realm. You can't force greater progress. As long as you improve your realm, everything will naturally happen." Hongjuan's admiration for Luo Fan had already risen to the level of worship, so he naturally wouldn't doubt Luo Fan's words. He was suddenly enlightened and ashamed. "Thank you, Master." Luo Fan nodded. Suddenly, his mind moved. He raised his hand and pointed. A little light rushed into Hongjuan's sea of consciousness. It turned into flying characters and patterns that filled the sky. It drilled into his divine soul and completely integrated into it. In just a moment, Hongjun understood that this was a refining technique. Moreover, if he were to refine the 9-spirit cloud radiance handkerchief according to the incantation, he would be able to increase the power of this Dharma artifact by at least 10 times. "Thank you for the technique, Master." Understanding this, Hongjun was overjoyed. The 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief had played an extremely important role in his tribulation transcendence, but at the same time, it had also made him feel that the power of this magic tool seemed to be lacking, and he was greatly distressed. Luo Fan nodded and said, "Refine this artifact before you continue." Hongjun quickly obeyed and sat cross-legged. His robe turned into a handkerchief and floated in front of him. Then, he raised his hand and waved. There were some changes in his body. The more condensed and pure energy flowed quickly around the mysterious track. In the end, it turned into talismans and was inserted into the handkerchief. Then, he raised his hand and waved. There were some changes in his body. The more condensed and pure energy flowed quickly around the mysterious track. In the end, it turned into talismans and was inserted into the handkerchief. When Luo Fan saw it, he knew that Hongjun had already comprehended the refining method that he had taught him. He was too lazy to continue watching. With a thought, he turned around and entered the Wuji Palace in the void. That refining technique was what Luo Fan had figured out last time. It was the method to condense talismans into layers of restrictions and insert them into the artifact. When he first saw Hongjuan's 9-spirit cloud light handkerchief, he found that Hongjuan's method of inserting the 9 application techniques of the secret of supporting heaven and earth into it was very crude. There was no way to exert the supreme power of the artifact. At that time, he had the idea of imparting him the Qi refinement technique. It was delayed until now because of other matters. As Luo Fan entered the Limitless Void Palace, the Limitless Void Palace rotated and disappeared into the void. It was not something that Hongjun could sense. "Limitless Boy, come out and talk." Luo Fan shouted. Limitless Boy's figure instantly condensed in front of Luo Fan. He looked calm and indifferent. He didn't speak and just stood there quietly. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't be angry because of a treasure spirit without self-consciousness. He shouted, "Control the Wuji Palace and follow behind Hongjun. Don't be more than 10 feet away from him. When his life is in danger, help him. Otherwise, don't bother." "Yes, sir," Limitless Boy said emotionlessly. Limitless Boy was equivalent to a supercomputer. Even if he was controlling the lightning pool carefully and extracting the heavy yin qi from the talisman ghost to refine the palace, he still had a lot of energy to do other things. After Luo Fan gave the order, he didn't care about anything else. He raised his hand and pointed. The netherworld Milky Way in the sky made a turn and descended from the sky. In the blink of an eye, it extended to the front of Luo Fan. In this mini Kiliacosm, Luo Fan was almost omnipotent. He knew all the details of the netherworld Milky Way in an instant. After thinking about his idea again, Luo Fan finally completely determined every detail of refining this artifact. With a move of his mind, the complicated mantra flowed in his mind. Then, a unit of magic power separated from his earthly immortal Tao fruit and quickly circulated around his meridians. Gradually, it turned into a large blood-red light and gathered in his right palm. With a wave of his left hand and a slap of his right, one heavy talisman after another rushed out of his sleeve and into the netherworld Milky Way. At the same time, one blood-red spherical talisman after another rushed out of his right palm and into the river. The number of heavy talismans corresponded to the blood-red three-dimensional talismans. Every heavy talisman that rushed into the netherworld Milky Way was followed by a three-dimensional talisman. One after another, they flowed out of his hands in an endless stream. It was as if a blood river and a black river were rushing out of his hands and flowing into the netherworld Milky Way. It was a very strange sight. After the heavy talismans and blood talismans entered the netherworld Milky Way, the netherworld Milky Way shook violently. Wisps of black mist kept coming out of the river. Then they were devoured by the lightning pool down below. The black mist was none other than the impurities in the netherworld Milky Way. The spring water of the netherworld Milky Way was condensed from heavy energy and could be considered pure. However, it was still lacking compared to the purity required by the artifact. Therefore, it needed to be purified first. After the blood talismans and heavy talismans entered the netherworld Milky Way, they intertwined with each other, condensing and sticking to each other. Gradually, they turned into layers of restrictions that covered the entire netherworld Milky Way. As time passed, the netherworld Milky Way grew more condensed and pure. Gradually, it emitted a faint yellow light that made it look like a mysterious topaz. Its size and length had shrunk by more than 1,000 times, making it look like a small stream. At this point, 1,000 years had passed. Chapter 59. At this point, the refining of the artifact was almost complete. This magical tool was extremely mysterious. It seemed to exist between reality and illusion. Its shape was like a solid, but it was also like a gas, and it was even more like a liquid. It was constantly changing between reality and illusion. Sometimes it was faintly discernible, as if it was in another space. Sometimes it was calm and motionless like Mount Bujo. It meandered and rotated in front of Luo Fan like a living creature. During the refining process, the tens of millions of heavy turbid talismans that Luo Fan had collected in the netherworld for 3 years had already been completely integrated into this artifact. They were completely entangled with the tens of millions of talismans that he had cast out, scattered, and reorganized, and finally formed 18 layers of unimaginably complicated and mysterious restrictions. These 18 restrictions were not the peak of this artifact. According to Luo Fan's design and the endurance of the netherworld Heavenly River, at least 31 more restrictions could be constructed in this artifact. In other words, the peak state of this magic tool was as many as 49 restrictions. Compared to the Yellow Turban Strawman Emperor, it had 13 more restrictions. After the 49 restrictions were constructed, it could communicate with it with its heart and nourish it with its spirit. Finally, it could produce spiritual consciousness and become a treasure spirit, a magical artifact. It could be said that its future was quite promising. At this moment, although this artifact had only 18 restrictions, which was not even half of the peak, its power was already extremely shocking. Even if it was Luo Fan himself, as long as he refined this artifact, he could use its power at any time to more than double his strength. And if Hong Jun refined it at this time, his strength could at least increase by 100 times. This was because Hong Jun's physical body was too weak and could not withstand too much power. If Hong Jun's physical strength could be increased by several times, the multiplier could reach at least 1,000 times. The reason why this artifact could have such power was that the restrictions of this artifact were created by Luo Fan based on the innate ability of the Talisman Ghost. It could borrow the power of the tens of millions of heavy turbidine talismans that were integrated into the artifact at any time. Moreover, the way in which the restrictions created by Luo Fan utilized energy was much more exquisite and profound than the talisman ghosts. After all, the tangible rune ghost knew how to use its own supernatural power, but did not know why. Although it was born with this supernatural power, it only knew how to use it crudely. How could this method of application compare to Luo Fan's understanding from the essence? Luo Fan's mind stirred slightly, and the yellow jade-like, sparkling and translucent magic tool suddenly spun and shook, forming an auspicious cloud in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan took a step forward and stepped onto the auspicious cloud. The moment his feet came into contact with the magic cloud, a feeling of becoming incomparably powerful appeared in his heart. He raised his hand and clenched it lightly. The air exploded like a thunderbolt. Even the space in his hand seemed to be slightly distorted. Even the space of a many-thousand world couldn't bear such a gentle grip from him. Luo Fan had already attained the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, and his strength was already very powerful. Although his strength only doubled after obtaining the magic tool, in terms of the absolute increase in strength, it was already an incomparably amazing increase in strength. The increase doesn't seem to be as much as I thought. Luo Fan looked at it, but he was somewhat dissatisfied. The degree of distortion in the space seemed to be only a little stronger than when he didn't use the magic tool to increase his strength. There was no essential breakthrough at all. It seemed that the increase in strength of this magic tool was much weaker than what he had imagined. Suddenly, Luo Fan's mind stirred, and he couldn't help but laugh out loud. It turned out that it wasn't that his progress wasn't big enough, but the stability of this many-thousand world had been greatly improved. This many-thousand world was created by Luo Fan, so Luo Fan could naturally sense the changes in this many-thousand world at any time. At this time, he already understood that in the 1,000 years that he was refining this magic tool, the Limitless Boy had impressively extracted all the heavy Yin-Shi from the Talisman Ghost. At this time, the land under his feet was 10 times bigger than 1,000 years ago, and the sky was 10 times higher. In the depths of the lightning pool, the tangible Talisman Ghost had already disappeared. There was only a white humanoid Talisman Ghost that was as small as a baby's fist that looked like a sculpture. It was tightly bound by countless purple chains. Although this humanoid talisman was small, the composition of its lines was incomparably complicated and incomparably profound. Its size couldn't compare to the heavy Yin talisman, but its degree of profoundness was 10,000 times stronger than the heavy Yin talisman. Even compared to Luo Fan's magic power unit, it had a different kind of profoundness, and could even be called an existence of the same level. Talisman characters and talisman characters were very similar. At first glance, they might even be confused. But, in fact, there were many essential differences between the two. Among them, the biggest difference was that the talisman character was a complete whole, while the talisman character was a very mysterious unit. The result of this difference was that if the two were taken out to look at one, the difference would not be very big, and the power would not be too different. Of course, this referred to the situation where the degree of profoundness of the structure was not much different. This was needless to say. But if a certain number of them were combined, the power that the talisman character could display would definitely be 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times stronger than the talisman character. This was also the reason why the talisman character wanted to combine the power of the many heavy Yin talisman characters, and the reason why Luo Fan wanted to combine the magic power units to display the strongest power was that he could do it with just a thought. So, it's the heavy Yang talisman. Formless becomes tangible. Yin talisman becomes Yang talisman. This really contains endless profoundness. Luo Fan's mind moved, and he already understood what the core of the talisman character was. This heavy Yang talisman was formed by the heavy Yin talisman devouring and fusing tens of millions of its kind, but its power was only 10,000 times stronger than the heavy Yin talisman characters. It could be said that most of the power of the heavy Yin talisman had been wasted. But even the simplest process contained endless principles. The principles contained in the devouring and fusion process of the heavy yin talisman were also quite profound, and it also made Luo Fan feel that he had gained a lot, and he was even more interested in the structure of this heavy yang talisman. He raised his hand and grabbed, and the countless chains around the heavy yang talisman instantly collapsed, turning into thunder water and merging back into the pool of thunder. Then, the heavy yang talisman flew straight up and instantly came to Luo Fan's hand. Although this heavy yang talisman was the size of a baby's fist, it was very heavy, about 100 kilograms, and it was also very warm, like a warm water bag. His mind moved, and two golden lights suddenly shot out from his eyes, covering the heavy yang talisman. In an instant, the entire structure of the heavy yang talisman appeared in his mind. There was a boundless starry sky inside the heavy yang talisman. More than 40 million stars dotted the entire starry sky, forming a very complicated formation with endless mysteries. The formation formed by these stars was constantly rotating. In almost every blink of an eye, it would change into thousands of forms. And among these forms, it seemed that they were elaborating some kind of indescribable principle. With a thought, Luo Fan already understood that each of these more than 40 million stars was a heavy yang talisman that had been broken and twisted into pieces. Suddenly, his eyes, which could see through the formation and see through the source, slightly flashed. Focusing his mind, he saw an indescribable spiritual light quickly shuttling back and forth between these 40 million stars. Its speed was extremely fast, almost as if it was teleporting. At the same time, every time the spiritual light shuttled back and forth, it seemed to have obtained a little indescribable power and slightly strengthened. With one look, Luo Fan knew that this spiritual light was the spiritual consciousness of the talisman ghost that had been regenerated. However, this spiritual consciousness was still very weak, and it didn't have the slightest bit of self-awareness or memory. It was muddle-headed and only knew to constantly shuttle back and forth, constantly absorbing some kind of mysterious power to strengthen itself. Looking at this spiritual light that was constantly flashing, Luo Fan couldn't help but secretly sigh. The talisman ghost originally had a complete spiritual consciousness, and it had occupied hundreds of millions of miles of territory in the Yellow Springs. It had been tyrannical for nearly a yuan hui, but now it only had this muddle-headed spiritual light left. If it wanted to grow into a complete spiritual consciousness again, it would probably take hundreds of thousands of yuan hui. Even if this spiritual light grew, it would no longer be the talisman ghost. Chapter 60. It's just a waste of so many heavy, turbid yin talismans. Luo Fan sighed secretly. He raised his hand and threw it gently. The abnormally heavy, turbid yang talisman in his hand instantly rushed out for tens of thousands of miles and sank into a bottomless cave. Although the heavy turbid yang talisman had undergone a qualitative change from yin to yang, and finally from the original yin talisman to yang talisman, its root was still the heavy turbid yin qi. Relatively speaking, being in a place with rich yin qi was more beneficial for its growth. This mini kiliocosm was a complete small world. Naturally, it had all kinds of energy, and there was no shortage of yin qi. Among them, the place with the richest yin qi was deep under the ground of this continent, which was also the place where Luo Fan threw the heavy, turbid yang talisman. Luo Fan did not lack the power of this heavy, turbid yang talisman. In addition, he also wanted to see what the spiritual sense that this heavy, turbid yang talisman would look like when it grew again. Therefore, he created the best growth conditions for this yang talisman. Master, there are two spiritual sense reactions in the southwest, 384,520 miles away. At this moment, Limitless Boy's emotionless voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan did not withdraw the order for Limitless Boy to pay attention to the surrounding situation. Therefore, although thousands of years had passed, Limitless Boy was still paying attention to the surroundings. At this moment, he discovered the abnormal situation that Luo Fan asked him to pay attention to. Luo Fan's mind moved. Through the perception amplification of the Void Wuji Palace, he instantly reproduced the scene of the location 380,000 miles away in his mind. It was a valley. It was an ordinary valley in the primordial world, but it seemed extremely vast and huge on Earth. The three directions of this valley were surrounded by 5 peaks of hundreds of thousands of feet high, which formed 5 inverted fingers. Only the northwest direction, which was the direction where Luo Fan was unobstructed. The 2 strands of spiritual sense were at the center of the palm, with the 5 fingers clasped together. The valley was filled with gray, chaotic energy. Its density was almost condensed into a liquid state, blocking the view of the outside world. Of course, this couldn't block Luo Fan's senses. With just a thought, he had already discovered that there were 2 innate gods in this chaotic energy. In other words, it was a pair of black and white flood dragons, 1 male and 1 female, entangled together. At this time, the 2 dragons were circling around, forming a black and white spiral shape. Their heads were touching, and their tails were connected. They formed a circle around the valley, with their heads facing the center of the valley. Yang was also the location where the primal chaos chi was constantly emitting. Flood Dragon. Luo Fan couldn't help but be interested. Over the years, the only innate gods he had met were Hong Jun and the strange tree that he had planned to be his disciple. Now, 2 innate gods appeared at the same time. Moreover, they were creatures that he had imagined many times on Earth. How could he not be interested? Furthermore, the spiritual sense of these 2 flood dragons seemed to be much more complete than that of the strange tree. Although he was still muddle-headed, he was a little more quick-witted. Luo Fan wanted to go over and have a look. With a slight thought, Hong Jun's state appeared in his mind. At this time, Hong Jun was jumping forward in a vast mountain area with a radius of 10,000 miles. His whole body seemed to have no trace of smoke or fire. His movements were extremely concise, and he almost didn't waste any strength. 1,000 years had passed in the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace, and 3 years had passed in the outside world. In these 3 years, Hong Jun still used the same method to seal his energy as before, and only relied on the strength of his body to go to Buzhou Mountain. Because his body had been greatly improved after going through the 7th Metal Thunderfire tribulation, his speed of progress in these 3 years was much faster than before. Now, the distance between him and Buzhou Mountain was less than 2 million miles. This distance, relative to the loftiness of Buzhou Mountain, was almost close to Buzhou Mountain. Being so close, the desolate and unyielding aura emanating from Buzhou Mountain was even more amazing. Although Hong Jun used to live on the top of Buzhou Mountain, he was always under the protection of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and this aura had almost no effect on him. Now, after sealing his energy and absorbing the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light into his body, Hong Jun almost lost all protection. Only then did he really feel how strong the aura emanating from Buzhou Mountain was, and how shocking it was. After being immersed in the aura of Buzhou Mountain for a few years, he had gained a lot of benefits, much more than the time he spent on the top of Buzhou Mountain. The most obvious change was that his will had been immersed and crystal clear, just like colored glass. Luo Fan knew that Hong Jun's state at this time did not need him to guard him. Even if he encountered some threats, with the yellow turban, Hercules Emperor, and the 9-spirit cloud-light handkerchief, he could definitely stride over. In an instant, he decided not to hang around with Hong Jun anymore. With a thought, the Wuji Void Palace turned into a purple-yellow light and flew in the southwest direction. After a while, it arrived above the valley with the 2 flood dragons. Arriving here, the purple-yellow light condensed into a square palace. Luo Fan's figure also condensed and appeared above the valley on a yellow cloud. After appearing, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The Wuji Void Palace rushed into his body, and then appeared in his sea of consciousness through a mysterious mechanism. At this moment, an earth-shattering dragon roar sounded from below. The extremely rich, chaotic energy, which was almost condensed into a liquid, was constantly tumbling under this dragon roar, producing obvious waves and swirling winds. Luo Fan frowned. In an instant, he felt an extremely fierce and tyrannical aura pouncing on him from below. A mantra flowed through his mind, and his eyes emitted two golden rays of light, allowing him to instantly see what changes had happened below. It turned out that the black and white flood dragons woke up almost at the same time. The four eyes that were originally closed in confusion were now full of tyrannical killing intent, staring at Luo Fan's figure like two suns. They opened their mouths wide and roared at the position where Luo Fan was. Their figure exploded and pounced on Luo Fan. The bodies of these two flood dragons were tens of thousands of feet long, and their sizes were hundreds of feet in diameter, which was really amazing. At this time, such a violent roar and pouncing on Luo Fan was really shocking. Eat you, I want to eat, I want to eat. The voices of a man and a woman passed into Luo Fan's ears along with the dragon roar. Luo Fan frowned. It seemed like the consciousness of these two flood dragons was even more incomplete than he had imagined. Compared to these two flood dragons, Luo Fan's body was even less than an ant. It was as if the flood dragons only needed one swipe of their claws to crush him into powder. Faced with the two flood dragons, Luo Fan did not panic. The aura that he had been suppressing suddenly dispersed. The aura that would never yield and never give up engulfed the entire valley. This aura was at least 10 times more powerful than the tyrannical and violent aura of the two flood dragons. The two flood dragons grew up in this valley not far from Buzhou Mountain. They were extremely familiar with the unyielding aura of Buzhou Mountain and were even used to it. Though Luo Fan's aura was different from the one emitted by Buzhou Mountain, they were similar in origin. Therefore, even though his aura was more than 10 times stronger than the two flood dragons, he could not suppress their arrogance. The two flood dragons ignored him and pounced on Luo Fan with their claws and fangs bared. Luo Fan sighed. The yellow cloud beneath his feet suddenly dispersed and transformed into a yellow jade robe that covered his entire body. Chapter 61. This giant hand was gray and seemed to be extremely condensed. Looking at it, it was as if it was real. The two black and white flood dragons were grabbed by this giant hand, and they let out extremely loud and furious dragon roars. The violent and crazy aura on their bodies instantly became even more violent. The power in their bodies, the chaotic chi that was as deep as the sea, burst out in an instant and madly attacked the giant hand that was tightly holding them. Dragon claws, dragon body, dragon horns, dragon tail, dragon scales. Every part of their bodies and organs became the most powerful weapons in an instant, and they attacked the giant hand that was condensed from the chaotic chi. The giant hand that he condensed suffered such a terrifying attack, but Luo Fan's expression didn't change at all, as if nothing had happened. Although the strength of the two flood dragons' struggle was strong, it was only brute force. To Luo Fan, who had attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit, no matter how strong pure brute force was, it was nothing and was unable to pose much threat to him. With a thought, countless talismans flashed in the giant hand. These talismans were faintly discernible, and they seemed to be randomly generated, but they also seemed to have been arranged very cleverly. They moved and flashed in the giant hand, and they were extremely vivid and agile. As these talismans flashed, the strength of the giant hand was visibly increased by hundreds of times. If the original giant hand was as fragile as tofu, then the current giant hand was as hard as a diamond. It was almost impossible to break or destroy. As the strength of the giant hand increased, the two flood dragons suddenly let out a miserable howl, and their bodies suddenly collapsed. Then they directly withered, and the madness and violence that erupted from their bodies completely disappeared at that moment. The various parts of their bodies that had become powerful weapons also returned to normal. Seeing this, Luo Fan covered with his left hand and opened his big sleeve. The giant hand and the two flood dragons quickly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, They shrank to the size of a palm and were put into Luo Fan's sleeve. Universe in Sleeve wasn't just a simple storage ability. It was a type of ability to trap and destroy enemies. The reason why Luo Fan didn't use it in the past was because he didn't meet an opponent that required this ability. Looking at the two loach-sized flood dragons in his sleeves, Luo Fan's mind moved, and a section of the mantra flowed through his mind. His mind connection magical ability allowed his mind to connect with the two flood dragons. Why are you attacking me? The meaning was not complicated. Even the strange tree would be able to understand it. Not to mention that the spiritual sense of these two flood dragons was much more complete than that of the strange tree. Kill you. Protect the treasure. Protect the treasure. The voices of a man and a woman were somewhat immature, but they contained a lot of fear. They were transmitted into Luo Fan's heart through the spiritual connection. Treasure. Luo Fan's eyes lit up. The innate gods were born naturally by the heaven and earth. They were the first group of living beings born at the beginning of the heaven and earth. These living beings were blessed by the heaven and earth. They themselves were rare treasures. Any part of them could make any cultivator go crazy. Now, that there was something that even the innate gods thought was a treasure, it was enough to show how precious, rare, and mysterious the treasure was. Luo Fan asked a few more times, trying to find out the whereabouts of the treasure. Unfortunately, although the two flood dragons were very afraid of Luo Fan, they were especially stubborn when it came to the treasure. No matter what methods Luo Fan used, they just didn't answer and pretended not to hear. Luo Fan asked a few more questions. He knew that this was the deepest shackles of their pure hearts. He didn't want to ask anymore. He didn't believe that he couldn't find the treasure when the two flood dragons could. He gently raised his hand and squeezed. The giant hand that caught the two flood dragons suddenly shrank, condensed, and became a spherical, gray crystal ball, wrapping the two flood dragons in it. In the gray crystal ball, there were countless talismans constantly moving. They turned into chains and tightly locked the two flood dragons. The two flood dragons completely lost control of their bodies and energy. The two flood dragons were like mosquitoes in amber, frozen in the crystal ball. They couldn't move, and even their spiritual consciousness was frozen. They couldn't think. This kind of sealing method wasn't too mysterious, and there was nothing worth mentioning. After all, if the Limitless Boy could do it, how could Luo Fan not do it? With a thought, the limitless void palace in his sea of consciousness suddenly spun and trembled, appearing outside his body. He gently raised his hand and threw the crystal ball that wrapped the two flood dragons straight into the limitless palace. It was suppressed by Luo Fan in the depths of the Thunderbolt Pool. The Thunderbolt Pool in the limitless palace suppressed the whole spirit space. It was the most stable and core place in the whole spirit space. To suppress the innate deities, it was the best choice. Without paying too much attention to the two flood dragons, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. The limitless palace rushed straight into the space between his eyebrows and returned to his sea of consciousness. He raised his head and looked down. The scene of the valley appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes. Because the primordial energy had been condensed into the crystal ball, there was nothing in the valley except for the primordial energy. Apart from the chaotic yuan qi that was surging out like a fountain, everything was clear and bright. There were no longer any of the gray clouds that blocked the way. The whole valley could be seen at a glance. A mnemonic chant flowed through Luo Fan's mind, and two golden rays of light shot out from his eyes, enveloping the entire valley. This time, because of the worries in his heart, once he used the ability to see through the formation, he directly increased its power to the maximum. Then, with the help of the Limitless Void Palace's amplification ability, he could see through a depth of 5,000 miles underground. Below the valley, there was a tributary of the Yellow Spring, about 2,000 miles above the ground. This tributary was 500 miles wide, which was quite vast. Where is the treasure? Luo Fan carefully examined the 5,000 miles of the ground and was puzzled. Underground, there was the biggest source of primordial energy that Luo Fan had ever seen. It was extremely solid and huge, almost filling the whole underground of the valley. Around this source of primordial energy, there were countless rare treasures, such as 5 elemental essence, evil chi crystals, primordial steel, and so on. They were like ordinary sand and stones scattered all over the 5,000 miles of the ground. However, these were just ordinary treasures. Even Luo Fan himself felt that they were just ordinary treasures, let alone the 2 dragons with shallow knowledge and experience. The golden light passed through the yellow spring and continued to go deeper. So it's here. Looking at the depth of 4,900 miles, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable joy. This joy was so strong that it almost caused his earthly immortal Tao fruit to show signs of instability. In the 4,900 miles of the ground, there was a small space about 10 feet wide where the source of primordial energy overlapped. In this small space, there was only one thing. It was a gray spiritual light that constantly exuded an indescribable and mysterious aura. Connate inextinguishable spiritual light. Luo Fan instantly determined what that light was. Chapter 62. Hong Jun, the disciple of Luo Fan, had a congenital inextinguishable divine light. With the privilege of being Hong Jun's master, he had studied this congenital inextinguishable divine light in detail. He had absolute confidence in the characteristics and feelings of the congenital inextinguishable divine light, and he was confident that he would never make a mistake. Therefore, just by looking at the spiritual light below, he was sure that it was definitely the primordial world's innate inextinguishable spiritual light. It was innately born, undamaged, and would never dissipate or be destroyed. Unless one had attained the primordial Tao fruit, no matter how strong they could only seal and suppress it. They were absolutely unable to destroy it. In Luo Fan's heart, this divine light was not just a divine light, but represented eternal life. Although Luo Fan was a congenital deity in this life, as long as he breathed in the congenital primordial chi, he would never age or die. However, since the creation of this world, it had irreversibly evolved from the congenital primordial chi to the acquired primordial chi. One day, the congenital primordial chi in this untainted world will be transformed into the acquired primordial chi. Although this process might be as long as tens of millions of yuan, or even hundreds of millions of yuan, it was clear that there would always be such a day. At that time, the innate gods would no longer be able to maintain their characteristics of never aging and never dying. What awaited Luo Fan would perhaps be a slow march towards death. However, as long as he obtained a congenital inextinguishable divine light, the situation would change fundamentally. That was, time would become meaningless to him. The characteristics of never dissipating and never being destroyed determined eternal life. No matter how the external environment changed, no matter how time passed. Seeing such a treasure buried in the ground, how could Luo Fan bear it? With a thought, the limitless void palace in the sea of consciousness suddenly rushed out and arrived outside of his body. It turned into a purplish-yellow ray of light, and with a roll, it wrapped his body in the light. Then, the purplish-yellow light brought Luo Fan's figure down and disappeared into the thick ground in the blink of an eye. The infinite void palace was a Dharma treasure. Its speed was astonishing, and it avoided the obstruction of the ground to the greatest extent. In a short while, it had already brought Luo Fan's figure through the chaotic primordial chi source, through the tributary of the yellow springs, and through a layer of dense evil chi. Finally, it arrived at the 30-meter space 490 kilometers underground. As soon as he entered this space, Luo Fan instantly escaped from the envelopment of the limitless palace. His body flashed, and he appeared in the 100-meter wide space. An unimaginably powerful pressure arose spontaneously. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that his body seemed to be showing signs of instability. It was something that he had never felt since attaining the born Taoism aptitude. The feeling that his body was about to collapse instantly flowed through his mind and will. This primordial, inextinguishable divine light rejecting me. Luo Fan instantly understood what was going on. Combining the general knowledge left by Pangu's original spirit in his mind and the performance of Hongjuan's primordial, inextinguishable divine light, he had already understood another characteristic of the primordial, inextinguishable divine light. The primordial, inextinguishable divine light was born with the characteristic of being undamaged after birth. In this vast, untainted land, its quantity was fixed. Luo Fan did not know the specific value of this quantity, but obviously it would not be a lot. Such a treasure, such a mysterious, primordial, inextinguishable divine light, was naturally full of spirituality, which was not something that ordinary treasures could compare with. If it was left to evolve, after a long time, it would eventually become an extremely mysterious primordial spiritual treasure. Even ordinary Dharma treasures had incomplete spiritual consciousness. Since this primordial spiritual treasure was so mysterious, it would probably have a more complete spiritual consciousness. Therefore, the instinct of any spiritual thing determined that the primordial, inextinguishable divine light would reject all primordial gods and reject the fate of being obtained by any primordial god. As for Hongjun, who could be born with the primordial, inextinguishable divine light and easily take it as his own, it was absolutely rare. But it could not be regarded as normal. Knowing this characteristic, Luo Fan felt a little regretful, but he did not give up the idea of taking the inextinguishable divine light. With a thought, the Wuji Void Palace instantly unfolded, turning into a purplish-yellow light that attached itself to the topaz robe, isolating the pressure that was so strong that even his born Taoism body could not withstand it. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. A powerful, invisible force appeared out of thin air and wrapped around the ever-changing, gray, and extremely profound connate indestructible spirit light that gave off a profound aura. The spirituality of this divine light was obviously stronger than that of Hongjuan's. The rejection of being taken by others was also stronger, and it struggled wildly. Crack! An invisible sound was heard, and the invisible force that Luo Fan produced was broken like fragile glass. It actually produced such a strange sound, and in the end, it completely disappeared. It's really not simple. It's really powerful. I've achieved my Tao. Luo Fan was not surprised, but happy. A mantra flowed through his mind. The earthly immortal's fruit of Wei in his body shook, and 81 units of mana came out. They surrounded the meridians in his body and formed a complicated and mysterious cycle. They turned into a transparent energy that rushed out of his body and condensed into a transparent giant hand. It was 3 feet wide, and it grabbed the primordial, inextinguishable divine light that was sinking. After the primordial, inextinguishable divine light was grabbed, the extremely powerful pressure in the space instantly disappeared, as if it was completely isolated. This made Luo Fan feel relaxed. However, his mood did not relax. This was because the primordial, inextinguishable divine light was flashing, jumping, and vibrating. It produced a very strange and terrifying force that attacked the giant hand. Luo Fan smiled. He raised his hand and waved. Countless shadows of talismans flashed in the giant hand. The strength of the giant hand suddenly increased by many times. No matter how the primordial, inextinguishable divine light struggled, it could not escape the grasp of the giant hand. It could not break out of the giant hand's control and regain its vitality. "You, withdraw," he shouted. The giant hand suddenly shrank and turned into a ray of light. It rushed straight into the space between Luo Fan's eyebrows. Through some mysterious mechanism, it rushed straight into the world of his consciousness. After entering the world of his consciousness, the giant hand collapsed in an instant and condensed into 81 small, three-dimensional talismans in the shape of Buzhou Mountain. They released the primordial, inextinguishable divine light and rushed into a mysterious place. They left the world of his consciousness and returned to the earthly immortal's fruit of way. The primordial, inextinguishable divine light lost its restriction and rushed everywhere. Suddenly, the Buzhou mountain formed by Luo Fan's consciousness shook. It produced an incomparably powerful suction force that sucked in the primordial, inextinguishable divine light that was rushing everywhere. With a pull, the inextinguishable divine light was pulled inside. It was suppressed in the deepest part of his consciousness. It was also at the bottom of Buzhou Mountain. Phew! Luo Fan let out a long breath. A joyful smile appeared on his face. Although the primordial, inextinguishable divine light still rejected him, after being absorbed into the deepest part of his consciousness, the fate of this divine light being subdued was already decided. He only needed to work hard. After a long time, he would definitely be able to eliminate this rejection. Although the primordial, inextinguishable divine light was full of spirituality, it did not have spiritual consciousness. It was not as difficult to subdue it as it was to subdue a talisman ghost. Chapter 63. Naturally, Luo Fan was overjoyed that he had benefited from it. He turned around, and the purplish-yellow light that covered his body exploded, flashed, and extinguished. Not long after, he was already more than a mile above the ground. That was where the source of primordial energy was located. The source of primordial energy was huge and spherical. It seemed to have a diameter of more than 300 miles. The top was about a mile above the ground. In terms of size and distance, it was considered very close. The source of primordial energy was very lively, or rather, explosive. It constantly exploded with powerful streams of primordial energy that rushed out in all directions. The ground in all directions withstood different forces. As a result, in the direction where the ground was the weakest, a tunnel of several feet in circumference was created, and it became the outlet for all the chaotic energy. In other words, a tunnel was created above the ground and connected to the ground. All the primordial energy swarmed out of this passage, rushed for a mile, and rushed out of the ground. When he came to the side of the source of primordial energy, Luo Fan's mind moved. The purplish-yellow light formed by the everlasting void palace left his body and instantly condensed around him. Then, Luo Fan took a step forward and was already on top of the source of primordial energy. He sat cross-legged on top of the source of primordial energy, as if he was sitting on a throne. At the same time, the yellow robe around his body suddenly scattered, condensing into a yellow, jade-like magic tool, rushing into his lower abdomen and dantian. It turned into an auspicious cloud and surrounded the earthly, immortal fruit of the way. Unlike this magic tool, the everlasting void palace suddenly sank into the center of the source of primordial energy. Yang. Previously, with the ability to see through the source of primordial energy, Luo Fan had already clearly seen the inside of the source of primordial energy. Naturally, he knew that there were no extremely precious primordial stones in the source of primordial energy. Therefore, he didn't need to waste his energy to sense it. After sitting cross-legged, he took a deep breath and slowly operated the magic power in his body. At the same time, the mantra of the nameless divine skill flowed through his mind. An incomparably powerful suction force was suddenly produced from his body. In the blink of an eye, the chaotic vital energy that was constantly emitted by the chaotic vital energy source changed its direction. From the tunnel that was originally leading upwards, it suddenly rushed towards his body. Like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, it went straight into it. Then, it was crushed and purified by the magical power and swept away. The magical power units in Luo Fan's body were three-dimensional talismans shaped like Buzhou Mountain. Inside each magical power unit, there seemed to be a huge void. In the past few years, he had spent most of his time familiarizing himself with his own strength and practicing how to use his magic power. As for strengthening his physical strength, absorbing the primal chi of chaos, and enriching the three-dimensional talisman, he had put these things aside. Of course, this method was absolutely correct. It was definitely a way to continuously strengthen his foundation, allowing him to have more room for improvement in the future, and the process of improvement would be smoother. However, this also resulted in a result. Although his strength had increased from time to time after attaining the Earth Immortal's fruit of way, his spiritual power was still empty, and he still couldn't unleash the supreme power of his spiritual power. The current situation was that Hong Jun was under the protection of multiple instruments. As long as he carefully avoided the overly dangerous places, his life wouldn't be in danger. As for Luo Fan, he had obtained the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, but he still needed to use a lot of effort to subdue it. Plus, he felt that he had already stabilized his cultivation. All these situations intertwined together, which made him decide to absorb the primal chi of chaos here to enrich his spiritual power. Needless to say, the Void Wuji Palace was like this. The reason why the Void Wuji Palace was in such a state right now was because it could only produce chi that was in between the primal chi of chaos and the primal chi of chaos. After the time acceleration, the chi that was gathered could only support Luo Fan's consumption. Wasn't this because the primal chi of chaos was too little? Now that there was a chance to absorb the primal chi of chaos, how could Luo Fan let it go? The Void Wuji Palace absorbing the primal chi of chaos was equivalent to a lesser Kiliacosm absorbing the primal chi of chaos. Although Luo Fan's spiritual power was strong and the Earth Immortal's fruit of way was mysterious, in terms of absorbing the primal chi of chaos, it was far inferior to a lesser Kiliacosm. As the two of them absorbed the primal chi of chaos, the primal chi of chaos that gushed out from the middle of the valley and out of the entrance of the crypt completely disappeared. Even the primal chi of chaos that was already out of the crypt was being sucked by an invisible force and poured into the crypt. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. At this time, Luo Fan was in a mysterious state of no man and no self. His body was almost instinctively absorbing the primal chaos energy from the outside world. Suddenly, his heart was stirred, and he felt as if someone was calling him. He suddenly woke up from that mysterious state, as if he had just woken up from a dream. An incomparably relaxed, comfortable, and satisfied feeling flowed through his mind. With the help of one person and one treasure, in just 10 years, the chaotic energy source beneath him had shrunk to a third of its original size. Originally, it was only a mile above the ground, but now, it was dozens of miles above the ground. The primal chi of chaos below him had turned into a very strange shape. Circles and circles of ripples were constantly undulating on the surface of the primal chi of chaos. The ripples intersected and formed a scene as if the primal chi of chaos was constantly shrinking and being pushed inwards. The changes below combined with the primal chi of chaos around Luo Fan's body. It was like a gourd with a great contrast between the top and bottom. Disciple Hong Jun prays to Master. Disciple has arrived at Buzhou Mountain. Master, please show me the way. The voice came from the dark and went straight into his mind. Luo Fan's mind moved, and the scene where the voice came from appeared in his mind at the same time. He saw Hong Jun's figure beside a towering mountain. His body was surrounded by a vast and unyielding aura that was almost solidified, because he could only see a radius of several thousand feet around Hong Jun. He could not see the entire mountain clearly. He only knew that it was extremely tall and huge. However, through the perception of this aura, Luo Fan already knew that this mountain could not be anything else other than Buzhou Mountain. So, I've already arrived at Buzhou Mountain. Luo Fan smiled. At this time, Hong Jun was kneeling on the ground and using soil as an incense stick. He looked in the southwest direction, which was where Luo Fan was praying. The voice that went into Luo Fan's mind was not a real voice, but Hong Jun's prayer. Counting with his fingers, Luo Fan knew that another 10 years had passed. Hong Jun's robe did not change at all, but his face was full of hardships and vicissitudes. There was also an extremely firm and indomitable will coming from his eyes. Obviously, Hong Jun had made great progress in the past 10 years. Luo Fan thought for a while and dug out a skill from the depths of his memory. It turned into a spiritual light and went straight to Buzhou Mountain, which was millions of miles away, through the connection in the dark. It went into Hongjuan's mind. Find a place to practice this skill. Along with the spiritual light, Luo Fan said this. Luo Fan had only said these words with his ordinary thoughts, without adding any power to them. But in Hongjuan's ears, it was indescribably majestic. It was like a huge thunder that resounded through the world. As soon as he finished speaking, the spiritual light that went into Hongjuan's mind suddenly exploded, producing an extremely powerful and mysterious impact. It instantly swept through every inch of space in Hongjuan's body, instantly shattering the countless talismans that he sealed his energy. They turned into pure energy again and integrated into his dantian. The aura on Hongjuan's body suddenly flourished, and the gray light flickered on his body. The vicissitudes on his face instantly disappeared, and he looked energetic. "Thank you for the skill, Master." Hongjun bowed down respectfully. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved gently. The scene that was reflected in his mind disappeared completely, and he could no longer sense Hongjuan's thoughts. He had cut off the mysterious connection in the dark. Chapter 64. Just now, the prayer method that Hongjun had used to let Luo Fan sense his thoughts was not mysterious, and it was not a special cultivation technique. The reason why it could produce such a magical effect and be sensed by Luo Fan from millions of kilometers away was because Luo Fan had already attained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, and Hongjun was extremely respectful to Luo Fan. More importantly, it was because this was the primordial world. At this moment, the primordial world had just opened for a period of time. It was the time when yin and yang had just been judged. All the rules in the world had not been completely finalized. At this moment, even the primordial chi that was tainted with the aura of chaos had not completely evolved into connate primordial chi, let alone the other rules. In such an environment, all kinds of unbelievable things happen like normal things in the future. The kind of ordinary prayer that seemed to the future generations could produce such a magical effect. In the process, both Luo Fan and Hongjun did not feel the slightest bit unusual. The technique that Luo Fan had passed to him through Hongjun's prayer was not an offensive or defensive technique. Instead, it was a calming technique that was similar to the clear heart technique. Hongjun had spent more than 20 years from millions of kilometers away from Buzhou Mountain. He had relied on his own feet and his own body to walk to Buzhou Mountain step by step. The insights and revelations he had obtained were definitely countless. However, among these realizations and revelations, the ones that he could grasp and quickly transform into his own realm and cultivation were only a small part of them. Most of the insights and revelations were buried deep in his heart, waiting for him to slowly cultivate and slowly dig them out in the following long period of time. The clear heart technique that Luo Fan had passed to him was a technique that dug out the insights and revelations in his heart. Through the cultivation of this technique, Hongjun's heart would become purer and clearer, and his grasp of his heart would become more and more complete. In this process, he could constantly interrogate his heart, dig out his insights and revelations over the years, and transform them into his own realm and cultivation. According to Luo Fan's estimation, when Hongjun could dig out 1/10 of these insights and revelations, he would almost be able to trigger the second tribulation and improve his strength greatly. If Hongjun could dig out all the insights and revelations, he would at least be able to trigger the 8th tribulation. By then, he would only be one step away from attaining the Earth Immortal Tao fruit. I hope you won't let me down, Luo Fan thought to himself. Thinking of this, he did not waste any time. He slowly closed his eyes, and his mind flowed through the nameless cultivation method. The Dharma in his body surged endlessly, producing a terrifying suction that crazily tore all the surrounding primordial chi. While Luo Fan was answering Hongjun's prayers, the limitless void palace did not show any signs of stopping. It was still crazily absorbing the primordial chi. In just a short period of time, the primordial chi source had shrunk again. In order to fight for the primordial chi, Luo Fan naturally could not waste any time. Time was almost meaningless in the untainted world. In the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. In these 50 years, Luo Fan's mind and consciousness were in a state of confusion. He seemed to be dreaming and awake. He seemed to be in a state of no man and no self. It was as if he had completely merged with the entire world. His body seemed to instinctively absorb the primordial chi, tearing all the primordial chi that could be found around him into his body, twisting and purifying it, and filling every unit of Dharma power. After a total of 60 years of absorption, Yang Qi was able to absorb the energy. This originally spherical primordial chi source with a diameter of more than 300 miles had been completely absorbed. At this time, Luo Fan was suspended in the spherical space of 300 miles in diameter. Yang. In front of him, the square-shaped, limitless palace slowly rotated in the void. Its body flickered with a faint purple-yellow light. It was like lightning flashing, 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 and flashing. Luo Fan sat cross-legged in the void. His eyes were closed, and his expression was calm. His entire body seemed to have merged with the entire world. Outsiders could not feel any aura emanating from his body. If someone closed their eyes at this moment and just relied on their perception, they would not be able to feel his existence in that position. Phew! Luo Fan let out a long breath and slowly opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, there seemed to be two deep grayish-brown lights flashing in the spherical space of more than 300 miles in diameter. At the same time, the feeling of being one with the world and not emitting any aura completely disappeared. An unyielding aura emanated from his body and instantly filled the entire spherical space. Luo Fan slowly straightened his body. Pop, pop, pop. Sounds of air explosions erupted from his body at the same time. It was due to the strength of his body stretching that caused the air to explode. In the past 60 years, plus the 10 years before Hongjuan's prayer, he had gained a lot. Although his ability to absorb the chi of chaos was much weaker than that of the limitless palace, the amount of chi of chaos that he had absorbed in the past 60 years was incomparably huge. This huge amount of chi of chaos was enough to fill up a part of the 129,600 units of magic power in his body. He could easily feel a part of it. This allowed his strength to double, and his body's toughness to almost double as well. It's a pity that the increase in power does not depend on the amount of chi of chaos that I absorb. Luo Fan sensed the change in the magic power in his body and understood. The amount of chi of chaos that he absorbed this time was 2 to 3 times more than the previous time. After absorbing the chi of chaos, the feeling of fullness in the magic power in his body was much stronger. However, the increase in his power was far less than the previous time. The previous time was when he encountered the primordial stone of chaos. At that time, after he absorbed the source of chi of chaos, his power increased by 3 times. This kind of enlightenment allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the path of cultivation from now on. He raised his hand, and the limitless palace shook slightly. It spun and came to his hand. When his mind and consciousness entered the limitless palace, Luo Fan instantly felt the changes in the limitless palace. Compared to Luo Fan's relatively slow increase in power, the changes in the limitless palace were huge. Although it was still unable to produce chi of chaos, the concentration of the chi of chaos that was between chi of chaos and primordial chi that filled the mini kiliacosm had increased by 2 to 3 times. According to this concentration, after condensing it, even if the time was sped up to 365 times, Luo Fan would still be able to cultivate a little. He would no longer be like before, where he could only maintain his own consumption. In addition, the body of the everlasting Void Palace was much stronger and purer than it was 60 years ago. During these years, not only did the everlasting Void Palace absorb the primal chaos energy, it also used the energy to refine its body. With a thought from Luo Fan, the limitless Void Palace dispersed and turned into a purple-yellow ray of light. With a sudden roll, it wrapped around Luo Fan's figure and rushed straight up into the ground. That speed was several times faster than 60 years ago. After a while, it brought Luo Fan's body out of the ground. Chapter 65. Standing in the void, in this world that he had not seen for 60 years. Feeling the rich primordial chi around him, Luo Fan counted with his fingers and realized that it had been 60 years and 76 days since he entered the underground world. More than 60 years. However, 60 years was equivalent to the blink of an eye in the untainted world. There was not much difference between the untainted world and the untainted world after 60 years. The whole world was still the same as what he had seen before he entered the underground world. Looking around and finding the direction, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed gently. The purple-yellow light, transformed by the Wuji Void Palace, rolled up his body and flew towards Buzhou Mountain, leaving a long shadow in the air. In his mind, there was a very obvious target, Hongjun, although he did not leave any mark on Hongju. Don't forget that Hongjun had a magic weapon made by him. Although it was not intentional, the Yellow Turban Strongman Emperor was made by him after all, so there must be his mark on it, so that Luo Fan could vaguely perceive its location. There was no doubt about the speed of the Wuji Void Palace. In a short while, it had already taken Luo Fan across millions of miles and arrived in front of Buzhou Mountain. It also allowed Luo Fan to really touch the special meaning of Buzhou Mountain. When the Wuji Void Palace stopped, put him on the ground, and returned to the world of consciousness, Luo Fan had already fallen into an indescribably mysterious state. Buzhou Mountain was the northwest pillar of the untainted world. It supported the endless starry sky nearly 100,000 miles above the northwest of the entire untainted world. It was transformed by Pangu's spine, containing the desolate and unyielding aura of Pangu, who created the world, and contained endless mysteries. It could be said to be the most magical and precious thing in the untainted world. An indescribable epiphany appeared out of nowhere. Gradually, Luo Fan entered a hazy, half-awake state as if he was in Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, he only felt that he had become incomparably tall, incomparably strong, and contained endless power. His feet were on the ground, and his head was in the sky, as if he could do anything with ease. However, at the same time, there was an indescribable, terrifying pressure coming at him from above and below his feet. The two pressures were in complete opposite directions, confining him to the center of the room. Yang squeezed him crazily, trying to make him yield, make him bend over, make him lie down. This kind of feeling was very strange, very bitter, and very tragic. An indescribable sense of heroism rose in his heart. At the same time, a sense of responsibility for the safety of the entire world rose in his heart. It was as if, as long as he retreated, even a little bit, the entire world would welcome a calamity. As he entered this state, an extremely mysterious aura slowly emitted from his body. This aura seemed to be the same as the aura emitted by the surrounding Mount Buzhou, but also seemed to be fundamentally different. It was like water nigh, for reasons known to all. The word "are" could only be changed to nigh, blended together, and yet seemed to be completely different. When they came out, it formed a sharp contrast with the aura of Buzhou Mountain. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan slowly woke up from that state. As he woke up, the mysterious aura around his body intertwined and merged with the aura of Buzhou Mountain. Li's aura gradually turned into a vast and unyielding one. It was very similar to his previous aura, but there was an extremely subtle difference. Is this the legendary epiphany? Luo Fan opened his eyes and looked at the seemingly boundless Buzhou Mountain that was not far in front of him. His expression was somewhat inexplicable as he sighed. After going through that epiphany just now, the benefits he obtained were enormous. With a thought, a complicated and abstruse cultivation method flowed through his mind. Most of the cultivation method was the same as the nameless cultivation method, but it was the tiny difference that made the mysteries contained in this cultivation method one level higher than the nameless cultivation method. He silently recited the mantra of this cultivation method. The earthly immortal Tao fruit in his body collapsed and turned into a magical power that circled around the meridians in his body, forming an incomparably mysterious cycle. After 81 circulations, the magical power once again condensed in his lower abdomen dantian into a ball that expanded and contracted indefinitely, like a strange fruit. That was the earthly immortal Tao fruit, which contained countless mysteries and infinite power. However, this earthly immortal Tao fruit looked the same as before, but in reality, there were countless subtle differences. Although these differences were subtle, when combined, it produced an unbelievable change. It increased the earthly immortal Tao fruit by more than one level in all aspects. It became more mysterious, more unpredictable, and seemed to have more power. Furthermore, the connection with his divine soul had become even closer, and the amount of life essence it contained was even greater. I see. Luo Fan said these inexplicable words, and his face showed an incomparably satisfied expression. As for what he understood and what he gained, even he himself was not clear. He only knew that he seemed to have understood something extremely important, understood some kind of mystery, and got rid of some kind of shackles that were imposed on him and in his soul. In other words, his understanding of the Tao of the underworld had deepened. How could this be described with words? A kind of understanding arose in the depths of his soul. The benefits he gained this time could even benefit him for the next billions of years. Such a huge benefit naturally did not only change his Tao fruit. The divine soul in the sea of consciousness also underwent an inexplicable change. The Buzhou mountain formed by the divine soul became more detailed and complete. The vast and unyielding aura that it emitted was grander and more obvious. The aura was also mixed with some mysterious, indescribable aura. This mysterious aura intertwined with a vast and unyielding aura, resulting in a very mysterious change. It made the Buzhou Mountain seem more solid, more majestic, and more magnificent. Because of the change in the divine soul, the entire sea of consciousness also underwent an inexplicable change. It became more real and more stable. The somewhat illusory, somewhat idealistic feeling faded a lot. The innate, inextinguishable divine light in the depths of the divine soul also produced a change that made Luo Fan overjoyed. Luo Fan had obtained this innate, inextinguishable divine light 60 years ago. At that time, this divine light was very repulsive to Luo Fan. It only knew how to struggle crazily after getting it, and was not willing to yield at all. As a result, Luo Fan could only suppress it in the depths of his divine soul, allowing this divine light to slowly familiarize itself with his aura and slowly accept him. Finally, after a long time, it eliminated its repulsive feeling. After 60 years of suppression, the effect was very ordinary, and the repulsive feeling was still very obvious. But at this time, unintentionally, the repulsive feeling of this innate, inextinguishable divine light for Luo Fan had decreased by nearly half. Chapter 66. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart's blood flowed. He left the state of comprehending the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and turned his head to look. He saw that at the foot of Buzhou Mountain, tens of thousands of miles away, there was a black and green light rising into the sky. The light was lively, mighty, and extremely agile. It was like a dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Calculating with his fingers, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. This phenomenon would only appear when Hongjun had just passed his second tribulation. Hongjun's second tribulation was the Gui Water Heavenly Wood Tribulation, which lasted for 1 day, 24 hours. During this period of time, Luo Fan happened to be in a state of epiphany. Therefore, Luo Fan, who was originally very agile, did not sense it. It wasn't until he left the state of epiphany and Hongjun passed the Gui Water Heavenly Wood Tribulation that he felt something. The epiphany, just now, seemed to have only lasted for a short while in Luo Fan's own eyes, but in reality, he had been standing there for more than a month. This was the reason why such a situation had occurred. Fortunately, with Hongjuan's strength and the magic treasures he had, it was definitely not a problem for him to pass the heavenly tribulation. Therefore, Luo Fan did not feel any fear or regret because he had missed Hongjuan's tribulation. He did not use the power of the magic treasures to fly. With a thought, he turned into a long rainbow and flew toward a location tens of thousands of miles away. After all, it was only tens of thousands of miles. For Luo Fan's strength, he could cover it in a breath's time. The difference between using magic treasures and not using magic treasures was probably just a few blinks of the eye. The difference was not big, so there was no need. Soon, the long rainbow arrived at the place where the light burst out. It suddenly fell and condensed, turning into the figure of Luo Fan again. If this place was somewhere else, it would be a small depression, but at the foot of Buzhou Mountain, it was like a huge valley. The lush vegetation covered every corner of the valley. Hongjun was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the valley. Yang's body exuded a misty green and black radiance. These rays of light enveloped his body and shot straight up into the sky, reaching a height of 10,000 feet. They expanded and contracted unpredictably, like a spiritual dragon. The light that Luo Fan saw before was this light. With a step, he crossed a distance of several miles and arrived 10 feet in front of Hongjun. This place was outside the range of his light. With a move of his mind, a mantra flowed through Luo Fan's mind. With the appearance of this mantra, two rays of golden brilliance shrouded Hongjuan's figure. Instantly, the situation in Hongjuan's body and sea of consciousness appeared in his eyes and flowed through his mind. At this time, the energy in Hongjuan's body was undergoing a transformation. The number of strands mixed in it increased, and they were distributed more finely. They were entangled and stuck together more, and could be maintained for a longer period of time. Through the entanglement of these strands, Luo Fan could gradually see what form these strands wanted to take. It was also the core of Hongjuan's cultivation after attaining the fruit of Tao. With a slight movement of his mind, countless lines intertwined in his mind, and finally turned into a complicated and abstruse three-dimensional talisman in his mind. This three-dimensional talisman had a strange shape. It looked like a bundle of short bamboo slips made up of countless jade strips that were connected together into a bundle. Looking at this talisman, an inexplicable feeling emerged in his heart. It seemed familiar but also absurd. Jade Archive of Fate. Is this the so-called Jade Archive of Fate? An archive was an item that was made up of bamboo or wooden slips. It was an item that recorded words. If this kind of archive was made of jade, it would naturally be a jade archive. According to the legends, Hongjun had a spiritual treasure of enlightenment that was created by the heavens and earth, the Jade Archive of Fate. With all these things combined, there was no longer any doubt as to what form this talisman would take. I didn't expect that unknowingly it would coincide with the legends. I originally thought that the art of supporting heaven and earth would make his cultivation path different. Unfortunately, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. However, this bitter smile only lasted for a short while. Although it was different from what he had expected, it still seemed like a good thing. Three-dimensional talismans in the shape of jade archives of creation condensed within Hongjuan's energy. Not long after, they crumbled and dispersed, turning back into strands of silk. They twisted and intertwined with each other, trying to reassemble themselves. Luo Fan stood there quietly. The golden light in his eyes was like a searchlight that enveloped Hongjuan's body. He carefully observed every change in Hongjuan's body. After a while, he turned his attention to Hongjuan's sea of consciousness. Every time he went through a heavenly tribulation, Hongjuan's sea of consciousness would undergo a huge change. This time was no exception. In Luo Fan's eyes, Hongjuan's sea of consciousness had doubled in size. Now, it was already the size of 4 football fields. Sitting cross-legged in the middle of the sea of consciousness, his divine soul appeared to be even more solid. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the sea of consciousness, continuously extracting the energy that seeped into his sea of consciousness from a mysterious location. This allowed the energy to enter and leave his spirit continuously, constantly undergoing slight changes. However, this time, Hongjun did not show any signs of impatience on his spirit. It was just a simple extraction and conversion. Even though the threads would collapse after a short while after condensing into a jade archive of good fortune, as if all his efforts were in vain, he didn't show any signs of regret. His state of mind was shockingly calm. With the previous experience, in addition to the improvement of his realm and cultivation, he could clearly understand himself. He knew that it was already very rare for him to be able to do this with his current strength. He also knew that if he were to force it, it would not benefit his cultivation at all. Instead, it would harm him. Looking at Hongjuan's unhurried cultivation, neither arrogant nor impatient, Luo Fan could not help but nod to himself. He dispersed the golden light in his eyes and began to move his mind. Spots of spiritual light flickered in his mind. After a short while, countless complicated words and diagrams continuously burst forth in his mind. They continuously regrouped and finally condensed into a mysterious cultivation method. Luo Fan carefully comprehended this cultivation method. After modifying dozens of inappropriate parts, he suddenly focused and condensed the countless complicated words and diagrams into a spot of spiritual light. He raised his hand and pointed at the space between Hongjuan's eyebrows. This spot of spiritual light suddenly shot out of his finger, traversed a distance of 100 feet, and went straight into the space between Hongjuan's eyebrows. Through a mysterious location, it rushed straight into the world of his sea of consciousness. Suddenly, this spot of spiritual light collapsed and exploded, turning into countless complicated words and diagrams. One by one, they entered Hongjuan's spirit. This is Creation Jade Archive Technique. Master is here. A thought appeared in Hongjuan's mind. In an instant, he understood what was going on, and his mind became calmer in the blink of an eye. Luo Fan rarely named his own cultivation method and secret arts, because it was meaningless. In any case, he was cultivating it by himself. Could it be that naming it would make the cultivation method more mysterious? Hence, he only used its function to describe cultivation methods, such as the mind-reading technique, the X-ray eyes, and the like to describe them. As for the cultivation methods that he wanted to impart to Hongjun, he would give each of them a name that sounded very mysterious and appropriate. Of course, this was not because he was joking, but because he wanted to strengthen Hongjuan's desire to cultivate so that he would not slack off because this cultivation method did not have a famous name. This cultivation method was the same. Moreover, the name that he gave was extremely suitable for Hongjun. Creation. Jade Butterfly. So it's creation. I understand. An indescribable joy surged in Hongjuan's heart, as though the fog in his heart had been pushed away by a big hand. Chapter 67. Hongjun had only glanced at the name of the Jade Archive of Creation, and he felt that he had gained a lot. In reality, with Hongjuan's current strength, cultivation, and realm, it would be *T for him to know the level of existence of the magical power unit that he had condensed, what kind of power it would possess, and what its true meaning was. The reason why Hongjun wanted to condense the energy in his body into a magical power unit in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation was more of an instinct, and an idea that was inspired by the true meaning contained in the technique of indomitable spirit. In the process of condensing and transforming the magical power units in a cultivator's body, the cultivation method only played a guiding role in the process of condensing the magical power units. What truly determined the form of the magical power unit, and what kind of mystery it was the true meaning that the cultivator had comprehended from the cultivation method. Just like Luo Fan himself, the reason why the magical power units in his body condensed into the form of Buzhou Mountain was because he had comprehended from Buzhou Mountain the willpower of never yielding, never giving up, unwavering, and overcoming all difficulties to reach his goal. These various willpower were the main reason why his magical power unit had transformed into such a form. It was the same for Hongjun. Although the technique of indomitable spirit that he cultivated was greatly different from the original after being modified and deepened by Luo Fan, its essence was still the cultivation method that he had comprehended from watching Pangu supporting the heaven and earth. 10,000 people watching the same thing could produce 10,000 completely different comprehensions. Only the cultivator himself would know what he had comprehended. No matter how strong and how much an outsider understood him, it was impossible for him to know what he had comprehended. Just like Hongjun, what he had comprehended from Pangu was Pangu's willpower to create the heaven and earth. This was something that Luo Fan did not know. And this willpower to create the heaven and earth was also the true meaning of the technique of indomitable spirit to Hongjun. Because of this, what Hongjun condensed was the jade archive of indomitable spirit that could best describe the true meaning of creation in the world. In the past, Hongjun only knew how to condense energy according to his instincts and guide these energy threads to link and take shape. However, because he lacked the understanding of the true meaning of creation, it was chaotic and difficult to take shape. At this time, the cultivation method that Luo Fan passed to him contained a huge amount of mystery and was unfathomable. However, the most useful thing to Hongjun was the word creation in the name. In the blink of an eye, Hongjun felt that his heart had become much clearer, as if he had understood his true heart and his true self. A faint sense of satisfaction arose in his heart. Activating the cultivation method, the mantra and the route of the cultivation method flowed through his mind. I see. The process of condensing magical energy can be divided into 9 parts. Through cultivation, all the energy will be condensed and transformed, and the Tao fruit will be attained. Hongjun's mind was in a state similar to great enlightenment. In a breath, he saw a straight path leading to the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit. The Jade Archive of Creation technique was divided into 9 levels. When the 9 levels were perfected, all the energy in Hongjun's body could be condensed into a 3-dimensional talisman in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation. Finally, the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit would be attained. The Jade Archive of Creation was a mysterious spiritual treasure that was formed by 129,600 jade slips. It contained the infinite Tao of creation of the heaven and earth, and its power was extremely shocking. This kind of 3-dimensional talisman in the shape of the Jade Archive of Creation naturally had to contain 129,600 relative due. Only the Li part could be used. The Jade Archive of Creation technique that Luo Fan created was based on this essence of the Jade Archive of Creation. Once the first level of this cultivation method was perfected, the energy in the body could condense a large number of jade slips that were woven from 100 jade slips. The number of jade slips condensed in the second level remained the same, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips was twice that of the first level, 200 pieces. The number of jade slips condensed in the third level also remained the same, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips was 3 times that of the second level, 600 pieces. Thus, the number of jade slips condensed did not change, but the number of jade slips that formed the jade slips alternated according to odd and even multiples, just like the conversion of yin and yang. Finally, at the 9th level, the jade slips condensed would each be woven from 129,600 jade slips, forming a complete 3-dimensional talisman. Luo Fan estimated that, based on Hongjun's current cultivation base, he could at least cultivate this cultivation method to the 2nd level. As for the subsequent levels, they would coincide with the heavenly tribulation. In other words, every time he went through a heavenly tribulation, he would cultivate 1 level. When he finished going through the 9 heavenly tribulations, he would have perfected the 9 levels. This was not the result of Luo Fan deliberately controlling the progress. Instead, it was because this cultivation method corresponded with some mysterious principle, which was why it could correspond with the heavenly tribulation and was formed naturally. Hongjun read through this cultivation method, and his respect for Luo Fan rose to another level. If he continued cultivating according to this cultivation method, As long as he mastered the first level, he would be able to obtain some divine powers that only itinerant immortals had in advance. Although these divine powers were definitely not as powerful as real itinerant immortals, they were still many times stronger than what he had now. The incantation for the cultivation method flowed through his mind, and he controlled the energy in his body to slowly circulate according to the cultivation method's route. At this moment, his body was enveloped in a layer of black and green light. This light was full of vitality and spirituality, constantly replenishing the energy in his body and nourishing his flesh. This was the Gue water essence and E-wood essence left behind by the Gue water heavenly wood tribulation. They were some of the benefits he had obtained after going through the tribulation. As this cultivation method circulated, the energy in Hong Jun's body continuously condensed and compressed. Although the Gue water essence and E-wood essence were replenishing it, the energy shrank too quickly. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to half its original size. The number of threads within it continued to increase, quickly intertwining and intertwining. Gradually, they formed pieces of great jade slip-shaped three-dimensional talismans, floating and flowing within the energy. After these jade slips were formed, they gradually gathered and continuously weaved together, forming three-dimensional talismans that looked like jade archives. The process of forming the three-dimensional talismans in the shape of jade slips and weaving the talismans together took a full 3 days. After 3 days, the threads had already formed 12,960 jade archives that were formed from 100 jade slips. However, at the same time, after these three-dimensional talismans were formed, the energy in Hong Jun's body had been reduced by nearly half. Shockingly, in just 3 days, Hong Jun had successfully cultivated the first level of the Creation Jade Archive technique. To Luo Fan, 3 days was equivalent to the blink of an eye. In these 3 days, he had been standing at a position that was 30 meters away from Hong Jun, quietly watching Hong Jun cultivate there. Seeing that Hong Jun had only spent 3 days to cultivate the first level, Luo Fan was very satisfied. After all, this cultivation method was quite profound, and the essence contained within it was extremely profound. Without extraordinary talent, it was impossible to cultivate it in a short period of time. However, after 3 days, the dark green light emitted from Hong Jun's body had gradually weakened and shrunk. At this moment, only a thin layer of light was left covering his body. Seeing this, Luo Fan understood that the benefits brought to Hong Jun by the Gue water heavenly wood tribulation were about to be used up by him. In other words, the energy in this position would soon be unable to satisfy Hong Jun's cultivation. The valley that Hong Jun chose was very quiet, and there was no chaotic vitality source. Chaotic vitality source was very common on Buzhou Mountain. To be able to choose this place, Hong Jun had considered his state of being full of energy but insufficient realm. It was a very wise decision. However, this decision had obstructed him at this moment. This was because cultivating the Creation Jade Archive technique required a huge amount of chaotic vitality to achieve the best cultivation effect. With a thought, Luo Fan had already discovered the existence of a small chaotic vitality source more than 1,000 miles away. It was naturally far from enough for him to cultivate, but it was enough to support Hong Jun's cultivation. With a thought, the Void Wuji Palace appeared above his head. With a turn, it turned into a purplish-yellow light that covered Hong Jun's body. Then, the purplish-yellow light suddenly flashed and had already brought Hong Jun to the chaotic vitality source that was being suppressed by the stone. With a light touch, the stone had already disappeared and was stored into the Void Wuji Palace. The stone disappeared and chaotic vitality gushed out, instantly enveloping Hong Jun. Activate the technique of supporting heaven and earth to absorb. The Creation Jade Archive technique requires a huge amount of energy to be activated, so I can't be impatient. With a thought, Luo Fan's divine ability appeared, and he had already transmitted his thoughts into Hong Jun's mind. This thought came at the right time. It was just when the black and green light disappeared together, and Hong Jun felt that if he continued to cultivate, he might be a little hesitant. I said that I would update one more chapter in the middle of the night, so I desperately updated at 3:23 a.m.,